Alrighty, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Select Board for Tuesday, October 16th. It's a little unusual for us to be meeting on a Tuesday night, but here we are. We'll be starting the agenda as usual with announcements and review of the agenda, followed by a public comment period. After that, we have the town manager's report. In addition to the items listed, we will begin with a discussion of the common victualler's license for Forge and Vine Restaurant, followed by the Select Board's agenda schedule, an update on the operational audit recommendations and implementation. We will discuss, review, and potentially approve the charge of the Capital Planning Committee. We will review a first draft of the proposed OPEB funding policy. That's other post-employment benefits. We will have a discussion of around the Prescott Oversight Committee and potentially determine whether or not to continue with that committee. We will review and discuss the town manager's fiscal year 2020 revenue projections. Then we will have an update from the town manager on the Highway Garage Capital Project, on the Green Communities Initiative, and on the pilot from Groton School. Under other business, we will have a discussion of the Community Compact, and then we will potentially approve the Groton School sidewalk order of taking. We then have our typical list of ongoing issues that we will get updates on. We then have our Select Board liaison reports and 2 sets of minutes to discuss and approve prior to our adjournment. So I will be chairing this for the first hour or so, and then Barry Pease will be joining us here on site. He is currently partaking on the telephone, so hopefully we will be able to hear him and he will be able to hear us. So who has announcements?
I have several after Becky.
All right, Becky, go ahead.
Yeah, I just would like to take this opportunity, since we have an election coming up in a few weeks, to remind people about the rules about placing campaign signs. They must only be placed on private property and only with the property owner's permission. They can never be placed on town or state land because the town and the state cannot be in a position of endorsing any one candidate over another one. And that means that the commons and the conservation land and the shoulders along the highways, you can't place signs there. The land along the country club belongs to the town. Undeveloped land is usually, almost always, owned. Conservation land is owned by both private organizations and the town. You must seek permission from a private owner before you put campaign signs on their property. Thank you.
Following along what Becky's talking about with the election on November 6th, there are actually 2 elections taking place simultaneously on that day. One is the state election. The other is a local election to deal with the marijuana issue, second step of the process that was approved at the October 1st town meeting. Because of that, we need double everything, double election workers and the like. So the town clerk has asked me to make an announcement tonight that we are seeking anyone interested in working in the polls to contact the town clerk. We have a few shifts, between 6 and 8 shifts that we need to fill on that day. They must be a registered voter in Massachusetts. They have to obviously be able to understand the voting laws, be polite with the voters, and be able to be organized for the poll activity. Training would be provided, and we pay $11 an hour for the position. You have to sign up to be on the Groton payroll because it is a paid position. So anyone interested, please contact the town clerk's office immediately. And I thank anybody for their interest. The second announcement that I have is a notification from Selectman Deegan. 4 weeks ago, dear members of the board and citizens of Groton, 4 weeks ago I suffered a severe concussion. Recovery has been quite slow. I have been limited to working 3 hours per day, first thing in the morning only. I apologize for having missed meetings. Unfortunately, I will miss the next 4 weeks of meetings as well, per the doctor's orders. I have been communicating with the town manager and chairman via phone and email. I can attest to that. He has absolutely been communicating with the town manager. I offer my opinions on issues and have been staying quite up to date on all issues that relate to our board. If someone wants to contact me, they can call or email me. I'm very lucky to have a great team to serve and work with at Town Hall. In addition, my business is working throughout the situation through my guidance with an incredibly talented and committed staff. I look forward to returning as soon as I am physically cleared by my doctors, Josh Deegan. So I wanted to make that announcement. The next announcement that I have, and I will try not to go on too long tonight, but a long-time member of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Bob Cadle, passed away last week. And in talking to the chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Zoning Board Administrative Assistant, we thought it'd be nice to have a proclamation in Bob's honor to recognize him. So if it's okay with the board, I'd like to read that into the record. Whereas the Zoning Board of Appeals and their assistant, along with the Select Board of the Town of Groton and the entire town, would like to remember Bob Cadle in his devoted service to the town. And whereas Bob Cadle served on the Zoning Board of Appeals for 2 decades, providing both wisdom and friendship, he was a mentor with detailed knowledge of land use and law, which helped with making sure that decisions were well-crafted and thoughtful. And whereas Bob Cadle developed deep relationships with many board members and had a dry wit that would bring his own brand of humor to sometimes stressful situations, the Zoning Board of Appeals and town missed him when he moved and know how lucky we all were to have known him. Therefore, be it considered that we, Barry Pease, Allison Manugian, John Geiger, Joshua Deegan, and Rebecca Pine, the Select Board of the Town of Groton, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, do hereby proclaim October 16, 2018, Bob Cadle Day, and urge all citizens of the town of Groton, together with their family and friends, to join us in celebrating Bob's life and his profound dedication to zoning and land use in the town of Groton. Established the 16th day of October in the year 2018. Thank you. That's nice. May I continue?
Yes.
My next announcement. Following along with the election, next week, I will be presenting to the board at your meeting. I'm
You
sorry.
have a little,
Oh, sorry.
your computer's taking over your world.
That does happen sometimes. Next week, I'm going to be presenting to the, the mouse fell asleep too. I'm going to be presenting to the board the handout for the election. The town adopted a bylaw that says we have to send out notification to the voters on any ballot questions that appear on local election ballots. Similar to what you received from the state a couple of weeks ago concerning the election. So Mike Bouchard has been working very diligently to get this done. I am going to bring it to the Select Board for official approval next week, but I thought it would be very helpful if you had a week or so in advance, this one for Barry too, a week or so in advance to take a look at it. In addition to that, John drafted a document that showed where zoning was before when the town meeting approved the zoning in the spring, and where it is now that the town meeting approved the zoning subject to the election. He developed this. We may try to incorporate this into the handout, but I just want the board to see this as well. I think this is a very useful document for all of you. And then the final announcement for the board is, at our last meeting, Selectman Deegan went into the audience and made a statement about the Fitch's Bridge issue and the whole procurement on what went on with that. So based on that, we wanted to make sure we crossed all our Ts and dotted our Is. So I contacted town council to find out exactly what we needed to do to make sure that everything was done to the letter of the law. And what we needed to do was file an emergency procurement disclosure in the Goods and Services Bulletin through the Secretary of State's office. So town council helped me draft the disclosure, and we filed that disclosure. It'll be published tomorrow in the Goods and Services Bulletin. I wanted to provide the board and there's one for Barry too, the board with a copy of the disclosure tonight for your records. That closes the loop on that issue. That's all the announcements I have, Allison.
That should hold us for a little while.
Yes.
John, do you have any announcements?
I do not.
Nor do I. Is there any member or members of the public here who would like to address us? Yeah. Just please grab the microphone as usual.
Yes, Connie Sartini, I'm speaking as a member of the Groton Garden Club. I'd like to call your attention to the work that the club has been doing at the Groton Police Station. They've planted a number of shrubs, locally sourced, below the new sign, as well as trying to put in additional plantings there. So if you have a chance to stop by, they've been doing a lot of hard work. We'd love to have you see it. Thank you.
Yeah, the club has
Thank
done an amazing job. Last year, they spent a lot of time and effort fixing up the 9/11 Memorial in front of the fire station. They do a lot of the commons in town and this work at the police station, so we're very fortunate to have them.
I was at the police station last Thursday.
On business or pleasure?
Pleasure. And they were working on it, and it really does look nice, very, very nice.
You know, it's a club that does a great deal of good work for the town. Civic beautification is our major goal.
And I was at the fire station at the end of the week before that, and that looks great, too.
Yes, moving on to the
Town
town
manager's
report.
I'd ask the Board of Selectmen to approve a common victual license for Forge and Vine Restaurant located at 128 Main Street. It's actually called the 128 Main Street LLC, doing business as Forge and Vine Restaurant. It will be a common vic license daily 4 p.m. to 1 a.m., which is in line with their liquor license. I'd ask the Board of Selectmen to approve this license.
I would entertain a motion to approve that license.
The motion number is 30-18. I mean, the number is
License number?
30-18. I second it.
Okay. Any other discussion?
So when is the license effective?
Today,
Until,
December 31st, and then they'll go through the renewal process with everybody else.
okay. And so is there a fee with these?
$25.
Oh, okay.
That's the
When-
maximum the state allows us to charge.
So if we're issuing them a license tonight, do you know when they're actually opening?
I think they're doing soft openings all week, and I think they want to have their official to the public,
I think it's next month.
Well, you
yeah, I think
better-
it is a week from tonight, a week from last night, yeah. 22nd, I believe. Very exciting to have another restaurant in town. And I'm hoping that soon I'll be coming forward with an announcement on an opening of a restaurant in close proximity to the town hall as well, soon.
The whole town will be
Yes.
excited about that.
Very good. So unless there's further discussion, all in favor of approving this motion as requested, please say aye.
Aye.
Very-
It has to be a roll call vote.
Oh,
You're
roll call
right.
vote, Barry's on the phone, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Pine, aye.
Manugian, aye.
Geiger, aye.
Peace, aye.
Very good. It's unanimous. All right.
Thank you. One of the goals that the Select Board had this year was to create a tracking mechanism to determine and the implementation of the various recommendations of the matrix audit. John helped me develop a spreadsheet for this purpose, and I basically went through it, filled in the various recommendations and whether or not it was accepted or rejected, and if accepted, how it would be implemented. So starting on page 6 of your packet, you will see a spreadsheet broken down by department with the actual recommendation, whether we accepted it or not, whether we rejected it, and why, the reason for it. I think this is a great spreadsheet that John put together, and I think it really helps us stay on top of this. Is one of the goals of the selectmen, was to make sure that we went through these and did it. I broke it down by department, along with an explanation when we think it's going to be completed, what the process is, and maybe as we do our updates for the goals and objectives throughout the year, we can just go through this and provide any update that we have going through. But this is something that the board had wanted done. I thank John for his help in putting together the spreadsheet, and I think it does a good job to allow us to continue to track the various recommendations. I'd be happy to answer any question.
Any other questions? I have a couple, but.
No, go ahead.
So Mark, the first one I'm wondering about is under the senior center, and it's item number 3.
Yep.
And their recommendation was that activities of participants should be tracked to gauge programmatic interest as well as overall participation levels.
Yep.
Was that rejected because it was a difficult task, or just because it wasn't deemed necessary?
It wasn't necessary because if you can see there's a program design is currently based on the 2015 needs assessment results. The 5-year long-range plan is also based on the assessment. It is anticipated at the conclusion of the 5-year plan, the COA will once again conduct a needs assessment. So Kathy felt she was already doing this, and she thinks she's already doing the reach out through the needs assessment, through their committee work, and then that's why she did it that way. I think we actually accepted it, we're already doing it.
I recall, yeah, I don't think that a needs assessment is the same as tracking
Right.
ongoing participation. So I think that's a strange response. I recall that when she was before us and we discussed this, she did say something about about tracking, and I don't remember what it was. I remember saying that, and she talked about the fact that they anticipate that participation will go down this year while they're in temporary spaces. And I have some recollection of saying that I think you really should track it, even while you think it's low. So yeah, I found that a little bit confusing myself. And
I can bring it
perhaps-
back for another meeting and have Kathy respond to it.
I think we must be missing something, because it's a pretty kind of logical suggestion, and why they would have said no.
Right.
It's not clear.
I'm meeting with her on Thursday,
Okay.
so I can also bring it up.
Any other
Are
questions
there
on that?
any other questions on this one, guys?
Does this layout make it more visible and
Yes, I
useful?
think this is helpful. How much did you have to create language to feed in here, or was that already done someplace
No, I didn't
else?
create any language.
You just took.
John
it
gave me
out.
the spreadsheet, I did all the
Basically-
language.
Made the columns and headings.
Yep.
And a sample page.
So Mark, then how much did you have to create new, or was it already in other stuff that had been?
It's a combination of new and things that I had already done for the board previously.
So some of it was cut and paste from things that had already been written. And some of it was added to fill in
Correct.
the cells I made.
Yep.
It did jump out at me that there were some places where I had not registered that there were recommendations to increase staff in various places. So I thought it was useful.
Okay, thank you.
So we
And
got
thank
one
you, John,
action-
for your help.
We've got an action item out of that.
Yep.
Um,
And that's, I'll talk to Kathy and report back to the board. Another goal of the board was to create a capital planning committee. I drafted the proposed charge of the committee for your review. The finance committee reviewed the charge, and they have some comments. Specifically, they would like clarity on whether the board feels it's appropriate for the advisory committee to also act as the permanent standing building committee. They were concerned that the group of 5 people may not have the capacity to deal with monitoring all of the capital assets in town while helping to develop and drive new capital construction projects. Some feel that if the committee were expanded, it would allow for subcommittees which may help compartmentalize the workload. So that was the Finance Committee's feeling on that. If you go to page 21 of your packet, you see the actual charge of the committee. Becky and I had a conversation this afternoon about whether or not we wanted to make this the permanent building committee for projects as well. I'll let Becky speak for herself, but I kind of agree with her position on it, that you really want to appoint specialized committees for a building project. We did it with the fire station, we did it with the senior center, and hopefully we're going to do it if we move forward with the highway garage. So I'd like to see this committee stay as more of a planning committee if we go forward with it. And then when we come to a specific building project, appoint a separate standing committee. I think that's what you and I talked about this afternoon, Becky.
Yes, and I think that a permanent building committee doesn't serve us very well, but I think that a capital planning advisory committee is an important addition to committees that we already have in place, and I would like to see this go forward. The one thing that I would say, I understand, Mark, that it's your committee under the charter, you get to appoint it. In general, you've heard me say this before, I think that it is important for the select board to have input on committee members, and I would like to urge you to remind us to help you find
Well,
candidates.
actually, let me read something else into the record tonight from Josh. Josh sent me this email today, and he asked that it be part of the discussion. And he says he's reviewed the charge for the committee, and overall it's fine. The new committee has a very important charge. Many of the initiatives that they will review involve major expenditures of taxpayer dollars. As the chief elected board in town, we have the responsibilities to appoint the most highly qualified individuals to evaluate each proposed project. It's imperative that the board appoint this board. Virtually all proposed projects will originate from the town manager, regardless of who holds a position now in the future. If the select board appoints those individuals, it will serve as an appropriate check and balance for the taxpayers. So he'd like to see the select board make the appointments to the committee. 6 of one, half dozen of another, you gotta ratify my appointment, so nobody serves in anything in this town that I appoint unless you say it's okay. I think that's a very important thing for the residents to remember. I can't appoint a janitor without you saying it's okay, or a crossing guard. So, I don't know, it's up to you, doesn't really matter to me. Ultimately, it's a committee, the charge is there, it's supposed to assist the town manager in reviewing these matters, so I'll leave it up to you to decide what you want to do with it. I have no opinion.
Did Josh suggest any specific change of wording?
No, he liked the wording, he just wanted the appointing authority changed. I believe that's all he said. Well, it's actually, I know that's what he said, I just read it.
So it's section B where it would say, the select board shall appoint?
Yeah, instead of saying the town manager at the approval of the select board shall appoint, you just take out the town manager and you say the select board shall appoint the capital planning committee. And the select board shall endeavor to appoint individuals by reason of their current or prior background, have skills in the area of capital planning, and so on and so forth. I'm fine if that's what the board wants to do with it. But that doesn't address the finance committee's issue.
Well, so maybe we should separate those and get a read on whether we think this committee should be a permanent building committee also. I've already said I think it should not.
John?
I've got several thoughts. I guess the bluntest of one is, I don't think this document's ready for prime time. The first problem I have in general is, I don't think we have a clear and recognized standard of what constitutes capital within a municipal government. There seems to be a lot of focus on business. And I talked to Mark, and he said, well, if it costs more than $5,000.
$25,000. $25,000.
$25,000, it's a capital item. So then I said, okay, are the 2 police cruisers we just bought that cost $30,000, are those capital items?
Those are part of the capital
The
budget each
fire
year.
truck that we paid $909,000 for, is that a capital item? So until we really put our hands around exactly what are we gonna consider as capital items, it's impossible for a board, and it's impossible for us as the designers of the charge to the board to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what it should say. I believe if the goal of this is planning for capital expenditures out, the short term is the 5-year piece that we're doing, out 10, 12, 15 years, that committee should be at the same level in terms of appointment and so forth as the finance committee, because it's a very important financial responsibility to being aware and making everybody else aware of capital expenditures that are going to come up through either standard equipment replacement or known problems with a certain item and so forth. I'll throw out another one. If we buy a computer server that costs $30,000, is that a capital item? Do we mark capital items and keep track of them? So I think we really have to do some work there, and I think the way this is written, where it's a building committee, but it doesn't say that in the title, and it's a capital planning committee.
It's not a building committee. It never says it's a building committee.
Well, no, but there's talk in there about overseeing buildings and building expenditures in here that I saw, or I think I saw. So I think that gets confusing. So I think, and I understand Gary Green has some concerns about wanting a document to do something, but I don't understand yet what exactly Gary's looking for. So I think we have to explore that further. So I just think we have more homework to do. It's a great first start, but we got some homework to do.
So, I was just gonna say that, having attended the finance committee meeting where they talked about this, there was a good deal of confusion on their part as well about kind of what it was looking for, what it was intended to include. And it was almost to a point where they were having trouble discussing what they thought it should include because they weren't sure what it was drafted to include. So I kind of agree with what I'm hearing from John. There was discussion at the finance committee, and I think it makes sense about the potential difficulty in terms of expectation and workload to having this committee do both capital and building. That said, I think it would be very beneficial to have a standing building committee of some sort so that all of the building projects are, you know, kind of processed, considered, reviewed in the same way. And we can avoid potential committees that have significant makeup of folks who really only are interested in one building or one project or one issue. Yeah, go ahead.
So the way I saw this working, and I participated with Gary and Mark on drawing up some of the language, was that this committee had the overview and the long-range view of all of our real estate holdings and all of the major improvement of those. And which I think would address some of what you're talking about with this a standing building committee, even though I wouldn't want to call this a standing building committee, but I would want, I see this as the committee that does provide some consistency to what we're doing as far as highlighting, you know, where we should be looking to make improvements and where we have space that we could reallocate to use differently should we need more space. As far as, and so I guess I wanted to say to John, I appreciate that you raised some really important questions, like what is capital? And that is kind of not clear in this document. Recreational facilities and fields, computer systems and vehicles, new buildings, additions, renovations, and so figuring out that I think would be an important part. I guess I was going to ask John, if that got clarified, are you in favor of having a capital planning committee?
I don't think I'm ready to make a decision. I'm certainly not saying no, but I would like to see have a much clearer picture of how this is going to work. We either need to emphasize fiscal, FISCAL planning,
Right.
as opposed to the construction, the actual design and construction of the buildings, because
Right.
the money's been appropriated by the time we get down into design and so forth. So
So that's why I thought this committee was involved before we get into design and physical construction.
but then it gets, you read, section C, subsection F, and it says, create and publish a report memo at the closeout of each capital project expenditure.
I see, right,
Summarize the process and any deviations from the plan. A comparison of projected actual spending must be a part of the report.
You're right.
We're not in the weeds, but we're in the tall weeds, I guess.
You're right, that implies it's more of a building.
That probably should come out if we're going
Yeah.
to follow what Becky said.
So we just need to give it more thought and,
All right, would you let Becky, Gary, and I go back to the drawing board, address some of John's concerns, and then bring it back to the board? We'll get together again, Becky?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would say too that I would think that in terms of building use, that would be more under a physical committee kind of purview rather than this fiscal one. I didn't read this to include anything along those lines, so I wasn't looking to it with that eye. I think perhaps paragraph E there would need to come out.
So paragraph A, where it says assess ongoing space needs and conduct review.
I read that as, do we need more space? You know, should we be constructing something new, not should we be utilizing the Lost Lake Fire Station meeting room differently? But
you could look at this and say, Well, let's let the finance committee do the capital planning. It's planning for expenditures that are going to eventually go into the operational budgets and so forth. And then have another group that's looking at much of the rest of this stuff. Because when we co-mingle in trying to write a charter that's co-mingled for just people that are going to do financial planning, long-range financial planning, and an actual building construction, it can get pretty confusing. So one option would be for the finance committee to consider picking up the financial forecasting, and so that could get explored. You could also have two committees. I think we got some various options.
Right, I know in the past, before we went to a charter, we did have a capital planning committee along with the finance committee. And I guess I was always under the impression that that was seen as a better way to manage. That you have a different group focusing on the long range, and the finance committee is focusing on the annual budget. Now, our finance committee does a great job of focusing more long range than just 1 year, as they should. So maybe it's possible for them to do both, but I think we should explore all of the options on that.
So I'm very open to all these options. The only thing I can't waver on is I got to see a definition of what constitutes a capital
capital?
in the municipal government of the town of Groton.
All right, so I'll get together with Becky and Gary, and we'll bring this back in a few weeks.
Sounds good. Yep.
May I contribute here?
I hope so.
Yep, go ahead.
All right, so let's go back a little bit in history to the kind of design and creation and the reason this came about. The impetus was we get kind of, as a board and as a town, we kind of hit with, look, this building needs to be done, look, this building needs to be done, look, this building needs to be done. And we only really find out about it or hear about it at the point in time when there's not really a lot of time to do long-range fiscal planning for this type of issue, whether hey, let's sock away money because in 5 years it's going to be needed, that kind of thing. And I realize that there's other definitions of capital, John, and I completely concur that needs to be clearly defined, outlined. I had anticipated this and had structured this solely in the idea of a group of individuals with certain skills and talents that are able to investigate the land and building and perhaps large assets, if you want to consider big trucks, other things that might qualify in that, let's say $500,000 and above or $300,000 and above or whatever you want to qualify that number as, that could be able to guesstimate what needs we're going to have as the town moves forward to the future. Time moves inexorably along. We can't stop it, but we can plan for it if we know there's going to be some big expenditures. And we're not going to be hit with, oh, by the way, and again, this is reality, that we need a new highway department. Oh, by the way, we need a new senior center. So that was my original reason for wanting to see this go forward as part of this team, and I hope that can be built back into the reason when this gets reworked.
Very good. Any other comments or questions from the board? All right. Jack, if you want to grab the microphone or come to the table.
So I comment with regard to the appointing authority, and this is independent of any existing entity or person in the authority. It's really about practice more than anything else. The definition of what the committee is, if there's one, is sort of in flux, but my expectation is that this committee will eventually make decisions and or recommendations that will come to town meeting and will represent probably millions of dollars of spending over the next few decades, probably tens of millions of dollars. And that the recommendation, and if this committee does not recommend, meaning they say, no, we shouldn't do this, these things will never make town meeting. And if they do bring it to town meeting, it will probably recommend in favor. So this committee will have tremendous financial impact on the pocketbooks of taxpayers in our town, perhaps more so than even the FinCom in terms of the decisions that they recommend and the weight that those recommendations carry. And those recommendations and the financial impact of them should be directly accountable to people who are elected. The people that we choose for this should be directly accountable to the people we elect, rather than to someone who's appointed by the people we elect. And so I believe that this committee has such potential impact that the accountability gap between it and our elected officials should be as small as possible. Again, this has nothing to do with the current town manager. This is about practice. And I'd like to ask you to think about that when you decide about at least appointing authority. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll work with Becky and Gary and bring it back to a future meeting. Is that,
There's another comment,
Oh,
question
sorry.
from the public, sorry.
Just seeing this for the first time tonight, I think I agree with where John was going in the sense that we may be getting into the weeds and crossing over to certain responsibilities that the finance committee has. But what really is needed is what I would call a facilities planning committee. If we have a dozen infrastructures in town, from the library to town hall and so forth, they all have roofs, they all have potential future construction issues, and putting a matrix together that looks at each facility in town and projects what the roof at town hall was updated in 1999 and has a 30-year projection. That would go a long way to educating the public to see that the town is looking to the future, needs to invest in its assets and its facilities. So from that standpoint, I think it's a good idea to have that. I think getting into capitalizing a patrol car, I'm not sure that's the committee that's necessary at this time of the
Thank you.
Comment to that?
Yeah,
I'm not saying necessarily we should. It's just not clear what we do.
committee.
Right.
Yeah.
okay, and
So look forward to more discussion around this.
so do I. Keeping in the goal, another goal was the establishment of an OPEB funding policy. To that end, working with my finance team, I developed a policy for you to consider. It starts on page 23 of your packet. The Finance Committee did review this at their meeting last week. I revised the policy that I put in the packet to the board this week based on the Finance Committee's input, and then Bud and I got together this afternoon at 4 o'clock as he watched me eat my dinner, or saw my dinner sitting on my table.
Your
I should say.
snack.
Yeah. And Bud and I made a couple of minor changes to it, so this one for Barry too. So if you look at the policy that's on the screen, we made two, I wouldn't say significant changes, but we made a couple of changes on the funding piece. We took out the first line where it says transfer unexpended funds for health insurance line item to the OPEB trust. We took that out. And what we did is we put determine and commit to appropriating the annual portion of free cash and available tax capacity to the trust each year. So that's a change. We took out the line in there was determine the annual tax revenue received from the room occupancy tax, because by saying that we figure out what is available in tax capacity, that sort of does the same thing, and it gives the board more options. So I agreed with Bud when we did that. And then we changed the next line to say determine and appropriate annually the amount necessary to prevent the net present value OPEB liability from increasing. So that is based on the analysis, and that probably sounds familiar to you, having been at the FinCom meeting last week. That's what the actuarial consultant said to the board. And right now, that level is about $169,000 annually that we would have to be put in there. And just to explain that so that people can understand, basically we would appropriate enough money each year to prevent the liability from growing further.
And how does it ever go down?
We stop paying the ARC, which is about $900,000 a year.
The ARC is the annual,
Correct.
what does it stand for? I'm sorry.
It stands for, right there, you see the line, the annual required contribution.
Okay. And who requires that? Who
That's,
figures
that's
that
in the, that's in the GASB 74, 75, that's in the,
The state.
the federal.
Federal.
Tells us how much.
How much, based on our actuarial review, the actuary comes in, reviews how many employees we have, how many are on the health insurance, what the life expectancy is. It's a convoluted formula that somebody a hell of a lot smarter than I would figure out. So, we hire somebody to do that for us every 2 years.
So, if I
we
may,
just-
I
yes.
I was going to, I'm sort of new at some of this, but my question was going to be, well, what have we been doing about OPEB funding?
Excellent question. For the first 2 years, 3 years, we appropriated just our current annual assessment each year for retiree health insurance. So we would take the $200,000 or so that it costs us to cover our retirees' health insurance, the 35% the town is responsible for, and we would put that into the OPEB trust. We call that the pay-as-you-go plan, just to get it started. Then, for the last 2 fiscal years, we decided to try to start paying down the liability, and we appropriated in each of the last 2 years $100,000 out of free cash in addition to the $200,000. So technically, we're putting $300,000 a year into the trust. One of the things that Bud asked for and our actuarial consultant said is, our liability right now is about what, 8.1 million, Bud? Yeah. Oh, is it that high now? Okay. So, in order to start paying that down and making, in order to keep that from growing, Bud asked, what is the amount we have to put in each year to maintain the 11 million or 9 million, whatever that number is? And that number right now is 169,000 in addition to the 200,000 that we're pay-as-you-go for the current retirees. So our plan would be to increase that 100 next year to 169 and then grow it by the growth of the budget each year thereafter until the year 2035. And in 2035, our unfunded pension liability gets paid off. And what this policy says with the line that you see on the bottom, when the town's unfunded pension liability is fully funded in 2035, take that money and just transfer it into the OPEB trust, which is a great idea that the consultant gave us. So that's the policy. I think it makes a lot of sense. Another thing that I put in here, and Bud and I went back and forth on this afternoon, but it's kind of an interesting proposal that I learned as a member of the Grafton Finance Committee. One of the things that we're looking to do is when a new position is created, fund enough money to cover that person's particular liability. So our actuarial told us that it's $4,166 is what it would cost us to fund per new employee. So
That's in Grafton or here?
no, here. That's here. I stole the idea from Grafton and then I implemented it here. I'm sorry for the confusion.
That's all right.
So, for example, we just hired a new firefighter. Starting next year, what we would do is budget the salaries, the benefits, the clothing allowance, all the union benefits. It's about, what, $74,000 per man, I think we said. We would budget an additional $4,166 and put that in the trust each year on top of the 169, and that would cover that particular employee. And when that employee retires, if we do that every year, we would have the money to cover that employee's liability. It's an interesting concept. We do that now with the pension, because right now, any employee that's been hired after, I can't think of the year, 2009, I think it is, they pay enough into the retirement to cover their retirement once they retire. That's that extra 2% a year that they pay, the 11 plus 2%, so they're paying 13% out of their check each week towards their pension. So that's following the same process. So Bud and I talked this afternoon. We would recommend to the select board tonight that you vote to adopt this policy as proposed, subject to review by our actuarial. And I'd ask the board to consider that after you have questions and whatever else you need. Anything else you want to add to that, Bud?
Just to answer back to the question, I think. I think you said, Becky, it wasn't, but we said we didn't want the amount overgrown, i.e. the OPEB number to get larger. This proposal, it really, the net OPEB liability will continue to grow because we're only funding the current payment, the 169. And as Mark said, we're only going to grow it to stay even with the town growth. So if the town grows 2.5% or 3% minus the schools, the municipal budget, then we're going to fund this to that degree, 169 plus that 3%. That will not cover what the growth is really going on. What it'll do is it'll keep it in line, the net present value in line with our numbers. So that it's going to show that we're spending the same level on this as we are as our regular spending in town. However, knowing that we could not, we did that forever, the numbers is going to grow. The kicker is in 2035, we flip the pension number over, and that allows us to pay it down rapidly. So then we get to a fact that we're hopefully in some year past 2035, it'll be back in line and be fully funded. And like Mark said, we have to check with Parker, that's the guy who did this, to make sure that he agrees. That's what he said, and that's what I think we heard. But he was talking so fast, it was kind of difficult to pick up all his numbers, as Allison will attest to. So we need, like Mark said, we need to make sure this is the right answer for a AAA bond rating, this is the right number for FASB, this is the right number to get you to the result that we all want is to fund this. And this is the most specific / general way to do it. With general funding, not getting specific about that, but making sure certain things are specified. 169, even with the town, in 2035, the school, and that's what Mike said. We are today, may change, but it'd be easy to change this in the future if that date changes for some strange reason.
I intend to be here in 2035 to make sure that we start making that payment.
I'd like to.
Hello, anybody there still?
Yep,
Yes.
we're still here. Did you have questions or comments,
Hello?
Barry?
Hello?
Oh, we lost
It's
Barry?
gotten real staticky here.
Oh, we lost him.
It
We
died.
lost him.
Yep,
All
we
right.
lost him.
Where is he?
He's in his car on his way here.
So, John, you still have questions? I have one question, Mark. With
Yep.
the 4,000-ish amount you were talking about, I assume that would be figured out for each employee as
No,
they
health
came on?
insurance cost is health insurance cost. So their health insurance, we don't, the salary doesn't determine the health insurance.
Understood. I guess when I was in the FinCom meeting, he was talking about, firefighters have a different retirement age or that it's a different amount depending on whether it's a new
I see what you're saying.
hire or whether you're hiring someone with 20 years of experience. So I'm just kind of wondering whether that amount would be a generic number that we've picked for each new employee or whether it's
I think it's a
figured out.
generic number for each
Okay.
employee according to what he said. Barry just sent me a text and asked, did we hang up on him?
Nope. He hung up on us, in
He
fact.
did hang up on us. Let me see if I can get him,
No, I
Let me see
think
if I
he
can
went
get
through
that.
some
Yeah.
tunnel or something that cut him off.
Yeah. The other thing just to throw out here that came up at the finance committee meeting that I continue to feel very strongly about is that I think it's important that the OPEB be called out as a line item in our operating budget so that it's something that we can see what's going there and how it's being funded as opposed to just looking at it through
Instead of
free
being a warrant
cash
article?
or as a separate warrant article.
so you want me to build it into the proposed operating budget next year. Hey Barry, sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
That's okay.
Okay, we could do that. Let's talk about that. As long as we continue to use free cash towards it and not operating dollars, because as you can see
Right.
later on in the meeting.
And that was part of the conversation with FinCom that got a little bit confused, but I think however we do it, it's very important that taxpayers kind of understand how much is being spent on that
And
what it is.
Okay.
And that it's not presented as kind of
so maybe
an
we can
icing on the
add-
cake sort of thing.
Okay, so maybe instead of having a separate article, I could talk to the finance committee. Maybe, Bud, we just put another line item under the health insurance budget.
Yeah, it would be, to me, it would be like you have, like in the back part of the thing, it has, for the pension, there's
Yeah.
2 pieces of it.
Yep.
But the total number goes in there.
Yeah, so why don't we can do that? No, we would have to have a separate appropriation into the trust, because that money has to go into the OPEB trust, because once it goes into the trust, it's locked and it can't be spent on anything other than.
Right.
So let me find out from our accountant on how we can do it. Maybe town council can help, because there has to be specific wording in there, but I agree with
Right.
you, Allison, it should be part of the overall, because it is part of our
Right.
overall cost of operation.
Right.
You're right. I agree with you.
Yeah, John, did you still have? Yeah.
I've got two or three things. I think this is a good document. It is ready for prime time, as soon as we get these verifications that you're working on. I want to try and help people in the audience understand the ultimate goal here is to create a trust fund with sufficient assets in it that it can generate the necessary funds to pay on an annual basis for retiree health benefits.
Correct.
That's where we're trying to get to. So when we say paid off, that may mean nothing more than we've reached the point where there's enough money in there based on the actuarial examinations that's going to generate the amount of spending money we get every year to pay for these. So hopefully that helps people get a feel for where we're trying to get to. The other item I want to mention is that the reason we did the pay-as-you-go back starting in, I forget when it was,
2015, I believe.
was because by just starting to move in that direction, it was a signal to both government agencies, state and federal, as well as bond organizations, that we were serious about addressing our liability here. If you think our liability is large, you ought to take a look at the one the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has. So I think we're doing all the right things, and I hope that little explanation clears some potential confusion with folks in the audience.
So I would ask the board to vote to adopt this policy this evening, subject to review by the actuarial and incorporation into our financial policies. The reason that I want to get this on the books as soon as possible is in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be meeting with Wall Street, and we're going to be going out to bond on the senior center, and it's very important we have this policy in place. So I would ask you to do that this evening.
So
Becky.
I'll make that motion, but I still have a couple.
Yep, go ahead, Vince.
Please.
Can you just confirm for me, the other post-employment benefits that we offer is only health insurance?
Correct.
So but we pay our retirees' health insurance until they die, or?
Yep, we own them. Well, the Medicare picks up a portion of it. So they do have various Medicare plans, and then we cover the supplemental after a certain age.
Right,
But we do cover it until they
right,
pass on.
okay. And then the other question I had, just to confirm, this list of bullet points under paragraph C
Yep.
is basically a buffet of choices that could be used, and we are not locking ourselves into using any one of them.
Yeah, it very
At any
carefully
time.
says here, among strategies to consider
Right.
for funding the obligation.
So this is the smorgasbord of choices that each year we might choose some of.
Correct.
Okay. It seems to me like a good policy.
Thank
I'm in
you.
favor.
I just want to clarify, you were right, it was 9.9, I was looking at 19, which is, this is always 2 years behind. So the current one went from 6.6 million to 9.9.
Yeah, you scared the heck out of me when you said
Well, I was
11
looking
million.
at 19, but again, it
Right.
was,
Yeah.
this is always 2 years behind.
Keep in mind too, that as we change the cost share in the plans and what the employees are responsible for, that also affects
Long-term.
long-term costs as well. And so there are some impacts there that will be taken up when the review is done.
So
2
so
years.
how does that actually work, like with someone who is retired now? Are we committed to paying the percentage that they paid when they were an
No,
employee?
when they retire, the percentage goes to 65-35
And that's for,
forever.
across the board for
Yeah,
everybody?
unless town meeting changes that percentage.
Okay,
Town meeting would have to vote to change that percentage for retirees
so we've moved to 70-30
on current employees.
for our current employees, but and so when our current employees retire, will they get,
They go to 65-35.
isn't 70-30 better for us? Or
No.
am I-
No,
I'm
no,
seeing
no.
it the wrong
No, the
way,
employees-
okay,
It's 5%.
okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I had to think about that for a second.
Okay.
I wanted to point out one other
Yeah.
item. I'm really enthusiastic about the notion of, for new employees, starting to make an annual contribution. Because one of the things it does for us is it makes visible to the employee and the unions and so forth, all that we spend on employees, healthcare, education, salary, and retirement planning. So I think it's a really strong message for us to send. It's part of your pay, or your, shall I say, compensation is a more general term.
I'm sorry, I had one other question. I forgot.
Please.
So you said, when we appropriate this money for OPEB, it goes into a trust fund?
Yes.
That the state manages?
No, our town treasurer manages it with Morgan Stanley.
Ah, and we earn interest.
Like
Huh?
all our other trust funds.
It earns,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mike Hartnett, as our treasurer, is the custodian of the fund. That's the
okay.
way town meeting set it up.
And so the interest that trust
Stays
fund
right
earns
with that
stays in
trust.
that trust fund?
Absolutely
Okay.
stays with that trust.
Thank you.
So Mark, I have a question. Can you confirm with, I don't know, there's town council or the actuarial
Yep.
number cruncher, that last sentence in paragraph C works, kind of
Yeah.
among the strategies to consider?
Yep, that's exactly what I'm
Particularly-
gonna ask him.
Particularly around the second bullet.
Yep.
I'd like to see us locked into that a little bit more firmly,
Okay.
if anything.
That's what Bud and I talked about today.
My personal preference would be to hold off on approving this another week until we have something in there about kind of OPEB as a line item and you had a chance to get all of this, all the i's dotted and the t's crossed.
Wouldn't we, I just don't know when I'm gonna be talking to Wall Street, so I'm concerned about
Understood.
that. This policy would be subject to annual review as part of our financial review. As a matter of fact, we will start reviewing this policy at the end of October when we start doing our financial policies review. So if we have to make a correction, we would make it at that time. And I want to talk to the finance committee, and I also have to find out how we would word it in the budget if it's going to be going into a trust and not into the operating budget. So
Mhm.
I don't know if I'll have that for you in a couple of weeks, but I promise you, we will do that. It's on the record. Promise.
I'm actually going to remember that.
I'm sure you will.
The only other thing that I'll throw out there, and it should not be incorporated into this, and the actuary was very clear on that, but none of this speaks to any of the school districts' OPEB. They have significant OPEB, larger than ours as a community, that ultimately will probably be the responsibility of the two member communities, and that at some point we'll have to deal with that, but,
We should share this with them so they can at least see what we're attempting to do.
right. So there was a motion, and I'm happy to second it to approve this, I guess. Are people comfortable approving this tonight, or with holding off a week, or what's the?
So it seemed like everyone was in agreement that there should be a line item someplace in the budget.
If we can. Yeah.
Right. Does that need to be written in the policy, Allison?
I think we can amend the policy and
I
add that
think
once I
so,
get the right wording. It should be in the policy, because that's your
Yeah.
policy. But I want to just make sure we can do it.
Okay.
So we can amend this policy at another time. I just want to have something on the books for Wall Street.
Is that likely to happen this very week?
I don't know.
Because
I
we
don't
could
know.
just approve it next week if,
I don't know if I'll have the answer for you by next week.
Oh.
So it's a short week. We're already into Tuesday,
oh, true.
Wednesday, so I lost a day this week.
Bud?
I think it's important, the most important thing is that Parker Elmore from this consultant firm says this is the right words to make sure that we're okay. And the second thing is, if we don't get the other one confirmed, that it goes in the budget. We have the budget cycle coming up, we can tell Mark it's gotta go in the budget. And other than getting the fact that the lawyers tell us we can't put it in the budget for some strange reason, but we can still track it because in the 5-year plan, there's a line for it anyways down below. So I think we ought to try to get Parker to get this, the consultant say this is the right language, and then get this approved, and then after that, as fast as we can, we get where can it go in the financials and how can we get it in and make sure we do track it. And then we can put it in the language come January 1st, but we can put it in the budget this year, we put this year's budget together.
Yeah, John?
I don't see any downside in approving this tonight. We know it, we know we can change it as we go further down the road. We are out talking to bond markets and so forth, relative to financing of several things. And this is a plus for us to have something in place here. So, and we've started putting money into this, which is another reason to get something down on paper. So I would support approving this tonight and recommend that approach.
For me, my big concern in terms of approving this tonight, just a second, Barry, is that if we approve this tonight with an eye toward knowing that we're going to update it in the near or in the next year, that when we review these kinds of things, sometimes the details slip through the cracks. I don't think we pay as close attention to the review as we do to the initial passage. And I just don't want, these details that seem somewhat minor to get lost.
That's not a minor detail.
I'd add it to the list of the.
I agree.
Your whole selectmen board meeting, select board meeting.
Can I
To
have
the ongoing
list?
issues list?
Yeah, ongoing issues, put it right at
Yep.
the bottom.
Oh.
They won't lose track of it.
True.
That's where those good things
Okay.
come.
Did you have a question or comment, Barry?
Hello, Barry?
No, I was just going to agree with John. I think it's wise that we move forward, especially since we're starting budgeting process, budget cycle in a couple weeks. I don't want to hold this up and not have these ideas put into that budgeting cycle as Mark prepares.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to approve this as presented and to also add it, that's not part of the motion, but to add it to the ongoing issues list. All in favor of approving this as presented pending the review by town council and the actuary?
Did you
Is that-
second? Who seconded?
We have to,
I did.
we have to do a roll call. Pine, aye.
Manugian, aye.
Geiger, aye.
Peace, aye.
Okay, so that's unanimous. But please make sure to add it to the ongoing.
I absolutely will.
Thank you.
So the board, we created the Prescott Oversight Committee to assist the board in the lessee of the Prescott School. We created it about a year ago. The committee has been dormant. 2 members resigned due to lack of action. Now that the lease has been signed and the Friends are up and running in the building, I don't see this committee as necessary. The lease is pretty self-explanatory. Now, originally when this came forward, Becky reminded me today that I was an advocate to have the committee up and running to help with the oversight of the lease. But the lease terms change from the original idea to a more, the Friends are responsible for the utilities, the town is responsible for the exterior of the building and insurance. And that every July we get together and we review the books to see if they have to give us any additional funding or not. So I'm not sure that this committee is as necessary as it once was, but I wanted to bring it forward, put it on the agenda for the board's discussion, and I will do whatever the board feels is appropriate. Obviously.
Thoughts, folks?
I like to state the obvious every now and then.
We appreciate that. So not hearing folks jumping in for me, I agree with Mark. I think at this point that this there's enough clarity around this and the intent that the select board could manage to review the business plan and such and make sure that it's all in compliance with the lease, but I don't know what other folks think. Becky?
Yeah, I disagree with the belief that we don't need a committee. I don't think we need this committee as it was written. But I just want to remind everybody that what we've embarked on with Prescott is unique. We haven't done this before in this town. This is a public-private partnership that there's a lot of unknowns about how to make it succeed. It's in the town's interest as much as it's in the Friends of Prescott's interest to work together to find the ways to make it succeed and also to recognize the pitfalls as they happen and not get too deep into a problem situation. So so the way that we do this, I think, is important, and I think there's some messaging or some imaging that gets conveyed by appointing some kind of a committee, a steering committee, a partnership committee. I'm not sure what to call it. I don't think oversight is quite the right term. And it's not the Prescott School that we're so much dealing with. It's the Prescott Community Center that we're trying to grow here. And long-term, you know, I've said this before, there's potentially really big financial benefits to the town for this to succeed. So I think it needs to be more than just, right now, it's pretty dependent on Mark at our side and on Mary, the president of Friends of Prescott. I would like to broaden that and say we're all committed to this and have a larger group. And I don't think, just as far as a management practice, that to have the town manager have to deal with all the details of every problem that comes up. And we have seen that there are a lot of unpredictable and unexpected problems that have come up. That doesn't seem like the wisest use of his time. So I would like to have a committee that helps with steering committee, communications committee, helps build what we're doing.
Any thoughts, John? Barry?
One thought I have is, in the absence of a committee, to look at this, the burden falls on the Board of Selectmen. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing, I'm just pointing it out. Okay. I look at the charge, and my objective is that the terms of the lease are met. That, you know, what the Prescott School, the Friends of the Prescott School Incorporated decide to try and do with their leased property is up to them. I don't think it's up to the town.
I agree.
It's a private, it's an incorporated, non-profit organization who have the freedom to do, within the terms of the lease, what they choose to do to make their non-profit organization win, make it a sustainable activity. It's not the town's responsibility. And I don't like, I'm really uncomfortable about seeing those lines getting messed up. Okay. I'm also, I'm curious, I guess, just on this committee charge. Number 3 says, consider all aspects of operation/lease to assure the best interests of the town and the lessee are met, and the lessee is successful.
Oh, let's say the lease is
The
successful.
lease is
Or that the
successful.
lease is successful. Well, a lease is successful if both parties adhere to it and the bills get paid. So I don't really know what, you know, the lease being successful is meant to imply there.
So this committee charge that Mark had written up a year ago for the committee named the Oversight Committee, and then my understanding was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but your vision of it at that point was to oversee the lease, but you told me the lease got written in a much simpler way. So that's why you thought this committee didn't need to exist. And I agree that a committee whose purpose is to oversee the lease is less important. I'll go back to the original concept that was presented to the town in 2016 in the spring, based on the municipal committee for the Prescott School. They proposed a development committee as a way of emphasizing the partnership between the town and this organization that would be managing one of our buildings. So that's why I agree. A lot of what's written in this charge is not relevant at this point. But does that mean that we don't need any committee at all? And that's what I would argue. It does not mean that. I think we should have a committee, and we should perhaps do some more brainstorming or figuring out exactly what the charge of that committee should be, what its intention would be.
Yeah, if you look at number 2, Becky, on the committee charge, it was to make sure that the milestones in the lease had been met, and there were specific milestones in the original lease that we've since got rid of. So you're 100% right that if we're gonna have some sort of committee, this charge is no longer relevant, because the lease is really simple.
Right.
It's, you know, show us your books, pay us up to $20,000 a year if you have it,
Right.
In a business plan.
in a business plan, which they have till February to get to us. So, and I know they're working on it. So that's why I thought, what's the sense of having the committee? It really doesn't serve a purpose, but, you know, that's why I recommended what I did. I know Mary wants to comment.
Thank you. Just came from a Friends of Prescott board meeting, and the board voted unanimously to ask that a committee such as this, or this committee, not be eliminated. And because we believe that a committee of this type, and we were supportive of it when it was originally a development committee, we were supportive of it as an oversight committee, and we would like to have a committee that's beneficial to both the town and Friends of Prescott, that we could communicate with on a regular basis. And we think that having a select board member on such a committee would also be very beneficial. The whole concept of the lease is that we're a partnership. We even have the rent as a partnership. We have a lot of things that are part of our lease that are dependent upon cooperation with the town and vice versa. And we think it would be very advantageous to the town and to Friends of Prescott to keep this committee or something like that, particularly if a select board member was involved in it.
Okay. Greg, if you can grab the microphone wherever that went.
Thank you. I want to stipulate I'm not a member or on the board of the Friends of Prescott. I was involved in helping to craft the strategy that turned into a blueprint for the Prescott School over the past 4 years. The notion of the charge to that committee, the charge to that committee was a vision and a plan. That was presented in a blueprint to be implemented. And when we met with the select board 2 years ago, after an 18-month review of what could happen at Prescott and how to make it happen, one of the recommendations we made at the time was to create the next phase committee, which is a development committee. That seemed to have a logic train to it. It would incorporate the best interests of the town, as well as any operating tenant that would go into the facility. And I think it still stands today as the best course of action to turn this town asset into the vision, implement the vision that was in that plan. It's one thing to look at Prescott and say, oh, we had a lease with the Friends of Prescott, and they will operate the building as long as they meet the terms of the lease. We can keep an arm's distance. It's another thing to see that the partnership of the town and the tenant in that building is paramount to its success. I say this in that you can operate a building, bring in revenue to pay the lighting bill, the town can do the plowing, but there's much more potential. In looking at this site, it's a 6.2 acre site, the largest public facility on Main Street. It has 32 parking spaces. Ask yourself, if that building is going to ramp up with tenancies and activities, there is no way that that building can be supported by only 32 parking spaces. Which leads to the logical next question: what could be done on site to help alleviate or to meet that growing need? municipal parking strategy for Main Street. And since Prescott is the largest public facility on Main Street, it seemed to me that logically a development committee comprised of citizens representing the Board of Selectmen, Select Board, appointed by the Select Board, would have the best interest in the town to leverage the potential and then unlock the economic potential of that site in partnership with the tenant who is managing the building. Now, I've been asked by the Friends to help a committee that is organizing itself right now to write the business plan to submit to you for your review and approval. I think there's a 6-month window. It shouldn't have to take that long. But the point is that we're just getting started producing the elements that go into a substantiated business plan. Some of the elements I just mentioned about what about parking? That would go into a business plan. So therefore, what's the role of the town and its interest in looking at that site and coming up with a strategy to meet the needs of the parking? Not just for the tenants of Prescott, but we are about to have a major event happen in this town called Indian Hill. We're going to have lots of people coming from Main Street. We're going to need parking. There will be all our opportunities at Prescott for additional use of space. But we have to work together in order to get there. The Select Board has demonstrated a partnership over the past 2 years since our report was submitted. We've had 3 CPA grants submitted to the CPC, and both the Select Board and the Friends were the joint applicants. We've seen nearly $1 million go into that building in the past 20 years. So the town has a stake, not just in the success of seeing a tenant bring life into that building, but its own interest and investment as a town asset in order to ensure that the public benefits in the best sense of the word. So we have an opportunity not only to see what the tenancy can do to bring cash flow and pay bills, but if in the case of a CPA grant, for instance, that's pending for $245,000 per sprinkler system, and there's a state grant that could match that, thereby save the town $122,500. That's a pretty good partnership. There are a number of federal and state grant opportunities that a tenant, a not-for-profit could apply for, or a municipality could apply for. And so in partnership, this development committee, Prescott Development Committee, would work together to leverage and maximize the potential federal, state, and private funding to go into a building that in the 2-phase plan that we presented is going to require some substantial investment 2-3 years from now. So I'll just conclude by saying the Oversight Committee, as Mark has said, isn't necessary today, but a development committee is. Thank you.
You're still
Go
chair?
for it.
No, you're still chair right now.
I'm still chair.
Until we're done with this one.
Alrighty, John, did you have your hand up?
Yes. I want to make it really clear. I don't care what the committee's called. I don't care what the ideas are. We can argue about what is an asset of the town and what isn't. We already had that discussion a little while ago from a financial sense. But I, as long as I sit in this chair, will not support taxpayer money being spent on a nonprofit organization, business efforts, unless it's approved by the voters at a town meeting. And that's the only reason I'm okay with CPC funds, because the voters voted to do that, okay? And talk about saving $122,000 because of a sprinkler system. The only reason the town would put a sprinkler system in there if it was going to use it for its own purposes. If we sold it,
Right.
we'd never get back the money in the short term for having put the system in there. It's not going to increase the value of the property from everybody I talk to by the amount that we would spend to put that in there. So I just want to be really, really clear with everybody, and I think I've been that way since was invited to a meeting early in my candidacy over at the Prescott School by the Friends of Prescott, that's where I'm at. So you need to figure out how you're going to convince voters to support these activities. It's not something the selectmen are going to be able to say, go do. No, it can't work that way. And I'm adamant about that.
Did you hear something in what he said that implied taxpayer money being spent?
I'm sorry?
Did you hear something that implied that forming this committee would mean taxpayer money would be spent?
Well, we're talking about the town adding parking spaces over there for the use of the lease, the lesser of, no, the leasee of the Prescott building.
Okay.
What I can read between the lines like everybody else, so I'm
Well,
questioning everybody where I'm at.
Okay, I wouldn't read that same between the lines, but I think that that is an open question. Certainly spending money to improve the grounds of the Prescott School is something that the taxpayer should vote on. I'm not advocating that anyone could approve that without taxpayer approval. But I think that the purpose of a committee is to help the plan succeed, not to spend money. And the whole purpose of this plan is to use this building in a way that doesn't cost us money.
That's an objective of the nonprofit organization. It is not necessarily an objective of the taxpayers of the town of Groton.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. What do you think?
I'm saying that what you want to do, and you're part of the leadership of the Friends of the Prescott.
I don't have any role of leadership in Friends of Prescott.
Well, okay,
I have historical involvement on the first committee, the municipal committee.
okay. Be that as it may, the town has not said, go create X.
True.
There, okay?
Mhm.
A nonprofit incorporated organization has said, we want to try to do this, okay? So when the taxpayers of the town say, we want to do something in that building, I'll support it. But if anything other than discussion wants to happen that isn't something that will go before the voters of the town for approval, I won't support it.
I don't think there's anybody in this room that disagrees with you on that, so I just wanted to make that
And then
clear.
we're gonna go to Bud, because he's had his hand up for a while, then Barry, I'll come back up to you.
Two things. One is, I think go back to that one, the operating committee, whatever we called it, I think that does exist today. It's myself, Allison, and Mark. We formed the lease. And in fact, I assume when we did that when the lease has to get looked at the end of this year, did they get metrics, et cetera, I assume unless it gets rejiggered, it would be the same three. And in fact, if something comes up, I would guess that the Friends would come to the mark of the same three, because I assume as long as the lease is in, that's the group. You don't need more than 3 people in this lease anyways, I don't believe. But the development committee, I think, is different. And I think that the development committee is needed for that building to see if it will be successful. Because if you don't form a development committee today, 3 years from now, when the lease is up, you'll have nothing. You'll have the same thing you have in it now, which is says if they can't get the $20,000, you will have a problem where you got to go back to town and say, hey, we have nothing but $20,000, and we have to, raise $20,000 more, or we're going to let it limp along. But there's no success in that building the way it's structured today. You just can't succeed big time. So if you have a development committee to say, what do we want to do there? What other groups do we need involved? Do we need a parking lot, which then become the capital planning committee because it's a land thing we just talked about. They would get involved in this at the same time, which we need to get that thing, reconfigured. But that would be the committee that they would work with. This is, to me, is a strategy development committee for that building only. And it'll tie back to the capital planning committee of the town and with the selectmen interface, I believe. And that's how that's going to be successful. And and they will come forward and say, we need capital funds, here's how we think we should get it. Obviously, it has to be voted on by the town. The town may say no, there's no business plan to support a growth curve, or they may say yes, because it breaks even, it's nice to have this building in town. And maybe by putting a parking lot up at, the town may vote to pay for it because it may help Gibbet Hill, it may help Ford's is going to open up, because I don't believe in parking over there. You might have the restaurant over here that's going to open someday, hopefully soon. And in addition to when people do come to town, they may want to park in water on a nice night. That may be a different reason they would put money over there. But we will never know that unless we form a development committee for that building and tie it back to the town and hit the rest of the people. We may want to talk to the Groton about this. We may want to talk to Indian Hill about this, but that development committee should do that, not somebody that's involved in just an operations of this thing. So I think you need both. One of them, I believe, is in place with Allison, Mark, and myself, and the other one to be formed with people who are, one, understand marketing, because this is a big part of marketing, and two, the success of that building, what can you put in there, knowing that if you put the money in, you can get other businesses, you can get a lot of things, and then also the management of the building. How do we want to manage a real building versus a building that has 4 or 5 classrooms in it versus a really operating business building? And I think that's what that committee has to do, and that's why we need this committee. And it needs to have some really high-powered people on it, not just people that are, I want to be in this committee, but what can they contribute to the marketing plan of that building tied to the rest of the stuff in this town? Because that could be very valuable to the town.
Barry?
So I'm trying to be very careful here because I've heard the word said that the way things are structured now, we can't be successful with Prescott. And if that's what we entered into, then I'm rescinding my vote and changing my vote to enter the lease because that wasn't what I voted on. I don't think that's what's been said here, but
let me clarify that. Success to me is a building that's filled and making money for the town. Success to me is not a building that's got one floor open, struggling to pay the rent, and therefore we survive without putting any more tax funds in it. That's to me is not successful.
I appreciate that clarification because I also think that I would wait to make any such judgment until I see that business plan and understand what that comes forward with because it may. I'm reluctant to do anything involving any committees until I see a business plan because that business plan may inform the type of committee we need to put together, whether or not that business plan has enough in it to say, this is the structure, we agree with the structure, we should have a committee evaluate that structure to say this can be done, this will make it successful, and it may already have all those things that you're talking about, but marketing this person, marketing that. If it does, what is an extra committee going to do that? I'm a little concerned that we're straying into this area of tactical oversight versus strategic policy oversight with Board of Selectmen. We have a town charter which prevents us from interfering in the day-to-day. We have lots of assets in town that we don't just have committees to say, hey, go make sure that fire truck's being used properly every day, right? I know it's not quite the same, but I'm worried that there's some tactical versus policy areas that we're digging into here. We've done the job of being the policy of setting that it can be leased, that this can be done. Now it's an operational thing. Are we still in the policy world, in which case we're backing up and saying, we're not quite sure that was the right approach? That's the question that needs to be asked here. I will certainly entertain somebody that says to me, we're not sure this is the right approach, we need to go back to the drawing board and develop another policy document on the future of Prescott. But I don't think that's what people are asking for here. And I hope that's not what people are asking for here, given the infancy of this situation. So until I see a business plan, I don't think it's reasonable or possible to really vote on what a committee charge should be, if there should be a committee at all. And I would hold off until we see that. I know that may be 6 months, because I think otherwise it's, you create a committee now and the business plan comes out and you're going to change the charge, and you've wasted 6 months of people's time and energy, which we've already seen happen once, where we had great people who got involved. Luckily, we were able to find new homes for many of those individuals on very important committees in town. But I hate to do the same thing and get interested parties involved. I think I'll leave it at that. I had a third thing, but I think those are the two major things.
I think that
straight my policy clearly.
That the idea of waiting until we see a business plan makes a lot of sense to me. I'm also just mindful that we do have other things on the agenda tonight, so if we can kind of keep comments short and kind of start to wrap this up. Jack, did you have something you wanted to add?
Thanks. So as I recall, actually, the original idea of this development committee included helping participate in the development of a business plan. I agree that a business plan is critical to making good long-term decisions. So there's a favor of actually having this committee. I definitely understand Mr. Geiger's point about wanting to sort of be arm's length and say, you've given this opportunity, please go forward and show us if you can do it. Not wanting to spend taxpayer dollars, although it was pretty clear that that's not what's being requested here. And I think the expectation is that taxpayer dollars are approved at town meeting. But I think the issue of why would we do this is really comes back to, did the taxpayers actually ask us to create this thing? And yes, they did. They, as I recall, the narrow margin by which the original sale of the building failed was in part influenced by this idea that people wanted a community center. And taxpayers, albeit by a minority margin, but sufficient, voted to not sell this building in favor, in part, of that community center. More importantly, over and over and over again, from the presentations made by the redevelopment group to the requests for, at this point, I think hundreds of thousands of dollars. Taxpayers have said, yes, we like this vision. They didn't say, yes, put a sprinkler system in this building. They said, yes, we like this vision. We want to support it with our dollars. And if the message from this board is, good, we'll give you the money, we're not going to give you any help other than money. We're not going to go and help and assign people to work, to be our representatives, the town's representatives to you to help you, Friends of Prescott. If that's the message, and we're not really following through on the message that voters gave to you, to say, make this happen. So I urge you to form this committee to fulfill, I think, the message that voters gave us, both when they saved the building for use as a community center, and when they have over and over funded the building with significant amounts of dollars in the name of a community center.
Mary?
One of the reasons that the board of Friends of Prescott considered this carefully and said we would like an oversight committee is that we do believe that the lease was negotiated. It's negotiated for 3 years, and we appreciate how cooperatively that went. We also had in the original plan milestones, and we also had the business plan due in 180 days. We want to work with the board of selectmen, the select board. We want to work with the town. We do not want to, but we will, if necessary, write a business plan, and it's in the lease. We will bring the business plan to you, and you can say yes or no. We would prefer to work with maybe a liaison from the select board. We certainly have already established some good working relationships with some of the employees within the town, so that when we bring that business plan to you, some of the things that are in it involve your interests along with our interests. We also want you to be aware of things that have changed along the way. Already, since that lease was written, there have been some changes in the fire code that we were not aware of, nor was the town, at least as far as I know. This will affect our business plan. And we do not want to come to the select board every month and say, oh, by the way, did you know this changed? Or did you know that this handicap ramp needs this, or whatever? Our business plan is in flux, in large part because the town is in flux. And we want to work cooperatively with you. I don't really care whether it's called an oversight committee or a development committee. The board and I really want to increase communications. As I told John when he did attend our meeting, and it's written into our RFP response, we plan to bring this to the town, we hope, next year. And the vote will be for what we see as the future of our community center. This is a pilot year where we're getting started, and we would like a committee like this by our side as soon as possible. We are a nonprofit, and that means that we're not doing this for the profit of any of us. We are doing this for the success of, 1, keeping this as a building as a historic asset, 2, providing educational and learning experiences for our community, and 3, hopefully making this a commercially positive venture. We've got 3 big goals here, and we need a partnership, and we think this might be one part of it.
So
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go to John.
I understand that there's already a committee involved, as I heard from Mr. Sheldon, in drafting a business plan. I certainly don't think that any member of this board advocates their citizenry of the town or their ability to help if they were so approached and wish to do so, in which case you would get what you want. So I don't think that's an obstacle. I wish I had the same type of mind reading abilities as other members of the audience to be able to predict everything that and understand the entirety of every vote that's made at town meeting, because they baffle me still to this day. So I'll give up ever hoping for that and just have to trust that the will of town meeting cannot be known. I would caution us to think that we recognize what can happen. I'm still not convinced that we understand what we need for a committee. And I think it's too premature to even try to deal with something like this without further discussion, which we probably may not have time for tonight.
Agreed. John?
I just want to, I guess, correct a couple things. CPC paid $20,000 or appropriated $20,000 to put a special handicap ramp into the rear of the building, the Prescott building, so that the basement could be used. So there are 2 floors available. Whether Friends of Prescott choose to use it or not is entirely a decision of theirs. But there are 2 usable floors in that building. The other item that I want to correct is when we voted on selling or not selling the building, there was nothing in the motion or the article itself that said, do you want to sell this building or turn it into a town center, community center? Didn't say that. It said, do you want to sell this building for these terms and this price? And I've heard dozens of people come to me and say, well, you know, that $35,000 was just not enough. I haven't had many people come to me and say, you know what, we really want to build a community center there. So to make an inference that voters were saying create a community center is a far stretch for me, because it could equally be they just weren't. It could equally be the case that they just weren't satisfied with the terms and conditions that were offered. So we just, you know, when we make these inferences that aren't substantiated by wording in motions and in articles, we're just creating confusion. Enough said.
I agree. So we've heard quite a bit. It sounds like to me that there isn't consensus to make a decision tonight affirming a committee like this. So the question is whether we want to kind of put this on hold until we have a business plan, or what does the board want to?
As far as having the oversight committee to pay attention to the execution of the current lease and so forth, that makes sense to me. The 3 people are here, and if you're going to have another committee, I wouldn't commingle it with the oversight of the current lease committee. Create another committee like Bud suggested. I don't see any problem doing it that way.
So
I don't think we should pull all this in on the whole select board to pay attention to this lease. We've got lots of things to deal with besides monitoring the execution of the lease. That's why we have a town manager to be here.
So do we want to form a committee potentially of those 3 people, or just have kind of a consensus that we continue to work as we did to negotiate the lease to oversee?
That makes sense.
I think due to election cycles and appointment cycles, you might have a challenge forming that committee permanently if it has to consist of a select board member, a FinCom member, and the town manager. I certainly think you could appoint the committee, that is, and these would be the members, but you'd have to redo them on a yearly basis.
Right, so I guess the question in my mind is whether that needs to be a formal committee, which then needs to keep minutes and all of that, or whether it simply is just the 3 people who have begun this relationship continue to make sure that the lease is being conformed with.
That begs the question, is there a public interest in having minutes taken when people review this? And if there's not going to be a report, whether or not we review this as what the outcome was, then there is benefit in having the minutes being that report. So that's my take on public interest on that. But that's, you know, I can go either way, right?
Well, whatever happens with Prescott needs to come back and report to this board. So if, come June, July, whenever we look at the
Oh,
books
but-
and decide,
We can rely
there'll be a
on
full
that.
report to the board.
But we're gonna see this business plan long before that.
Oh,
are we not?
absolutely.
John?
I believe the duration of the committees, thinking about a sunset law, so to speak, could be tied to the length of the lease. And it could identify that that committee would consist of one select person, one finance committee person, and the town manager.
Well, we did hear that,
And they could serve for the full term of the lease, just parallel with the lease.
or it could just, we could just continue the committee that we have for the current year. As it was said, this is the pilot year. This is when things are most needed, presumably the oversight and the problem solving is most needed this year. And that gets us out of the terms, the election cycle thing that you mentioned. But I don't know that it needs to be formalized. I'm happy with that small group continuing to serve in that advisory capacity.
And I don't believe that group can change anything in the lease.
No,
They
only
can't,
the
no.
selectmen can.
No,
Or,
no.
or by themselves enforce anything in the lease. It's gonna have to come
Correct.
back to the Board of Selectmen.
Right,
So-
right, and I don't think that there was any proposal for a committee
No, I
to
agree.
have that kind of authority.
That's why I think having it is useful.
Well, it seems to me that two selectmen want to wait for the business plan, two select board members want to wait for the business plan. One is up in the air, one wants a development committee. You're not going to make.
No, I'm not gonna push for something that,
Okay.
you know, and we clearly don't know what it is that we would be creating. I did hear that perhaps there might be an invitation for anyone on the select board who has something to offer to work with the Friends on creating their business plan. And I assume that that would be okay for anybody on this board who wanted to do that. They don't have to have our authority to do that.
All right, so unless there's objection, I think we should move on to item number 6 on the town manager's report.
From the frying
I will
pan.
officially turn this back over to the chair.
As you're aware, the select board and the finance committee is scheduled to meet with me and the finance team next Monday night to provide budget guidance for fiscal year 2020. Remind me towards the end of the meeting to figure out what time we're going to start the meeting. I know we're going to meet with the FinCom at 7. I don't know if the board wants to start a little bit early to cover some minor business before the meeting. But the select board had requested enough time prior to this meeting to review the data to make an informed decision. To that end, I met with the finance team to develop some preliminary figures. I sent an email, I copied my email that I sent to you a week ago with preliminary estimates in advance of October 22nd. I wanted to make sure you had enough time to consider the numbers. Please note that these revenue estimates are made 20 months in advance. So it's kind of it's a science, it's a guess, it's experience. So right now, we're looking at an increase of $765,000 in the levy. We get new growth, we're calculating at 20 million in value or 381,000. Earlier, we had carried over 27 million in value. I've knocked that back down. I'm not comfortable with that number at this point, given a lot of the things that we were anticipating for next year were picked up this year. So it's already in the levy. So that's why that number is 381,000. We're 81,803 under the levy limit. I'm level funding state aid. And as we did last year, we're bumping up the estimated receipts a modest amount. Last year, I think we bumped them up 100,000. This year, we're recommending an $80,000 increase. And we'll get into the detail next week on where we're looking at those various numbers. So we look to have about 1.3 million in new revenues for FY20, which sounds really good. I think that's a healthy number. But now we have some issues that we have to deal with going into the budget. In Neshoba Tech, there are 5 new students in the school next year. Rob Flynn, our representative to Neshoba Tech, has been very good about getting me the numbers of the students. He's done a great job keeping me
There were 5
informed.
new students already known at this point, will start there next
No,
September?
it's based on the previous October, Becky.
So they're
It's
already
based on
there?
the Yes, it's
Okay.
based on, now here's a troubling trend. We have 13 freshmen, we have 13 sophomore, we have 12 juniors, we have 9 seniors.
Oy, so,
So that trend in 2 postgraduates to get to the number. So now that trend has me concerned that we're dropping off 9 kids next year, and who knows what the freshman class is. The trend now has been 13, 13, 12 over the last 3 years. So I'm concerned that our Neshoba Tech budget is going to continue to climb.
and that's an increase that is different than the rate of increase in the general school population.
Yeah.
It's, well,
It's absolutely based on your number of students from your community in that school.
No, but I mean, in
as long as,
our school, our Groton Dunstable school population is not increasing at that same rate.
I don't know, I
but
haven't
it
seen the
doesn't
numbers.
matter, it's a choice they make, and if, as long as Neshoba Tech keeps increasing their offerings, and they have some incredible offerings over there, not just trade, but other really advanced level technology, engineering, and I know that personally know a couple people whose children are very, very, very focused on engineering, but don't have good skills in other areas, who chose to go because they could really pigeonhole and become, the next NASA scientist, builder for spaceships, but they don't necessarily have good skills in English or history, just not their makeup. So as long as Neshoba Tech and the state keeps giving Neshoba Tech incredible grants in technology, we can anticipate that there's going to be a huge competition for as good a school as GDR High School is. There's tremendous competition for Neshoba Tech, and they have a vested interest to keep building that competitive value, to keep providing value to the town.
Yeah, but I think what Becky's asking, if you add 10 students to Groton Dunstable in a given year, so their population increases by 10 students, it's not going to have the same budgetary
Oh,
impact.
absolutely, no, I
Because of the
understand.
ratios of students in the school determines the impact that Groton gets.
Yeah.
So us going up 5 students, Littleton going down 5 students, say, Pepperell going up, whatever, it's a formula.
Yep.
I'm guessing $100,000 increase, and I don't know if that's enough.
No, but Barry answered the question. It is in part because of exciting programs
Yes.
there. It isn't an expectable increase because we send the same percentage of kids to the tech, and our number is growing.
No,
And
I see your point.
every year at the middle school, I hear kids, parents saying, oh, she wanted to go to Neshoba Tech, but because the bus scene sucks comparatively to what they can get at Groton, and I didn't want them spending an hour on the bus, we chose not to go there. So I know that there are perhaps even more people that would go, but because of the transportation challenges, do
Right.
not send their kids there. So I think that you have this, is it a white, I don't know what the real, something out there that can be a challenge to our budgetary realities going forward, and I wouldn't be surprised to see more and more as the economy continues to change, as trade becomes more valuable as a career. I wouldn't be surprised to see that number growing, just because of the reality of college expenses going up so high and other things too. So I think there's a huge amount of difficult challenges in this Neshoba Tech value, and we would do good to strategically invest some money, not some mind power into it one day.
I think we also need to be cognizant that the tech schools in general, the per pupil cost is much
It's much
higher
Oh, absolutely.
than at Groton
Every new
Dunstable.
program is a whole bunch of equipment.
Yeah.
Right, so
Yeah.
it's a difficult, the numbers for Neshoba Tech are much smaller than we look at for the regional school district overall, but on a per pupil basis, it's
Right.
dramatically more expensive. to
Because you
be
have a whole
footing that bill.
administration in place for a 9 through 12 school, and you
Right.
have the same administration in place for a K through 12 school,
Right.
absolutely. Groton Dunstable Regional School District, in their projections for next year, they have a 5.33% increase, or $1,077,000. Health insurance, of course, as a guess, 10% has been what we usually carry. County retirement, good news, our early retirement assessment went down, went away, so our actual increase is up 100,000, but our early retirement is down 200,000, so there's a savings of 108,000 in that line item.
And
So
say
that's
that
good news.
again, why did it go down?
Early retirement, several years ago, we granted early retirement to several employees who retired well before the retirement age.
This was to increase total number of, or decrease total number of
It was an
employees at
incentive,
the
yeah,
time.
so, but what happened here is, somebody retired and we still filled the position. So it really didn't have the intended effect. So we, Becky, had to pay an assessment for that early retirement. And because it sped up their amount of time, so we got hit with an assessment on top of our regular unfunded liability of $200,000 a year for about, 20 years, I think it was. Quite some time. It's finally paid off. So we're saving that $200,000 goes away, and our regular assessment's going up $100,000, thus the savings of $108,000.
Okay.
Salary based on current agreements is $190. I'm gonna say that's a little high, because what I did is I just took the total salary line and increased it by 2% rather. And there are some budgets in there that don't get increased 2%.
Right.
Like the snow and ice and things like that. So, but that's it's a placeholder for now, just to give you an idea. Expenses, I just increased by 1%. Debt service within the levy is going up $10,000. We know that for sure. Medicare, that's because of the increase in the salaries. Our Medicare portion goes up about $8,000.
So
And then
why is that not included? I mean, that's a separate thing
it's a
than
separate
health insurance.
appropriation. It's the Medicare portion of the FICA tax. We don't pay FICA, but we have to pay the 1.45%. It's not in the health insurance, but we're required to pay that for our employees.
Okay.
So we anticipate that going up $8,000, and then 2 new firefighters for the full year is an additional $80,000. So we're anticipating budget increases in the neighborhood of $1,557,000. So based on that, we're anticipating a deficit of $248,666. Now keep in mind, the major reason for that is we have called back our estimate in new growth from the, what was it, 500 in the original to 381. And we did not anticipate a $100,000 increase in Neshoba Tech at the time. I was hoping that budget would be steady, but as Barry says, flat. As Barry says, such great programs, our students are jumping over there, and that's a trend right now that has me a little concerned, budget-wise. So, a couple of things, a 5.33% increase takes up 82.3% of our anticipated new revenues. They're 58% of the budget. When you add Neshoba Tech, anticipated increased spending on schools would take up 90% of our anticipated new revenues, which I don't think we can sustain. The current municipal budget is $15,804,000, including excluded debt. The proposed increase in the budget, but I will tell you, the excluded debt number for next year actually goes down, which helps out these numbers.
That's why you get that.
Yes, I know, so Bud yelled at me about that, so I should have taken excluded debt out of that. So the proposed increase in the municipal budget, taking into consideration the savings account of retirement, is about $379,000, or 2.4%. If you don't give me credit for the county retirement, the increase is about 3.1%. I think that's all important information for you as we get together with the Finance Committee on October 22nd. So you've had it for 2 weeks. I think you'll be able to make an informed decision next week. I know the Finance Committee met last Tuesday and reviewed these numbers, and I look forward to next Monday.
Is there any questions regarding any of these items? Becky?
Well, I was just gonna ask, when you wrote this is not sustainable.
90% of new revenues go
I
into
know.
the schools each year.
When do we talk about how we address that?
Next Tuesday, next Monday.
Monday, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I would ask you a question. I mean, do you have concerns, considerations on what that means? Do you
No, I
does it
understand what it
make
means.
sense?
My question is, what is our plan?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we can't make a plan fiscally without the involvement of our fiscal partners, unless we were to make some strategic policy decisions, which I don't think that
No, I'm
we
not.
should do without a conversation first. Anybody else from the board?
I will update the municipal budget taking out excluded debt to show you the percentage increase in that for next Tuesday, Monday. Because Bud and I promised each other we would never have the excluded debt argument ever again.
We do it.
And we do every year.
John, you all set till next Monday?
Yeah, I am. I'm surprised
Allison?
at some of these numbers, but
Yep.
I tried to give you extra time to review this.
Thank you. So my only kind of word of caution is, not surprisingly, around the couple important facts. A, You know, statistics, there's nothing incorrect here, but statistics can be spun to make anything look good or bad. And to me, this begins to be a little bit of a grenade statement that kind of gets thrown into the relationship with the school committee that I don't think is
Not my intent.
understood, and that's why I would encourage you not to put things like this in there. How's that?
It's still $1,077,000 is 80% of our new revenues.
Absolutely. There's nothing incorrect in that statement, but I'm not sure that it's worth calling out if the intent is anything other than kind of incendiary.
It was not. Understood.
Bud has grabbed the microphone. May he speak?
Are you done?
Done is a very,
Yeah,
very
okay, I was giving you a
complete
chance
word.
to finish.
No.
Go ahead, Bud.
I just wanted to, just to make sure we get what Mark stated and what Allison stated. The 533, as we all know, is not what they're spending.
Right.
It's their charge to us.
Yes.
So they're only spending per their last time they did this. Now, who knows what the current budget's gonna be, but when Mike put this together last time, their objective was to spend 4%, around 4. And if we do the math, we're gonna exclude that, $200,000, the value is 100 or 200, but it comes out almost 4%. So at the municipal big three line, we're spending almost 4, they're spending 4, but because of the 533, like Mark said, they're starting to eat more and more of the number. It's not that they're spending more,
Right.
it's that their allocation is charging more because of that famous $10 million. So the issue is going to be, how do we figure this out? Because it will become unsustainable when they spend 4 and we spend 4, and then they get charged 5. So there's just going to be a big, and it's narrowing. We're already at whatever percent we're at, and it gets worse because of the Neshoba jumping in there with this extra 7,500, whatever the number's going to be, it's going to be a big number. So I think the schools need to get involved and say, hey, this is the issue. We all know what we're spending, but what are we going to do about it if we can do it? Because again, 80% of our spending is wages and benefits, and 80% of their spending is wages and benefits. We all have the same issue. But it just trucks on. We did work on our benefit plan, which should help us in the future. But the school's got another issue and a challenge on that one. So I don't think this, I think you're right. I think the way it was stated, it's a true statement, but we want to be careful. It's not the 533, it's the issue. It's,
Right.
I mean, that is an issue, but that's not the school problem. They're spending, it's how they're charging us, and we got to figure out how we work together to work that down. But we are going to slowly take on the
Absolutely.
water.
Okay, so I look forward to next Monday.
All right. Yeah, number 6, please. Sorry,
seven.
number 7.
Now the town meeting has approved the design and bid funding for the highway garage. I just want to let the board know what we're doing. We've advertised for the architect and the OPM to comply with the procurement law. Proposals are due next Thursday. I also advertised for residents to serve on the building committee. I hope to have a proposed committee to the select board probably at your meeting of the 29th. Once the architect, OPM, and committee is in place, we'll get started on the design. So I just wanted to let you know where we're at. Any questions?
Have you, go ahead.
I'm just going to request, Mark, when you advertise for any kind of committee like this in town, can you just forward a copy of it to the select board so that we can forward it on to anyone who's approached us?
Great idea.
And could we use this opportunity right now to say we are still seeking
Yes.
applications? We're still seeking volunteers to serve on this building committee for the highway garage?
You run my ad for another week? Thank you.
That was actually my question. Do we have the right people? Are they, have we?
Oh,
how many-
two of the people that have,
How many applicants have come forward?
I have 3. 2 of them absolutely have building experience.
And we're looking for how many total?
5.
5, okay. So we do have quite a shortage before we can get going.
Yep.
All right, John, do you have anything?
Not on that topic, no. I'm
Becky,
okay.
you all set?
Yep.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Yep. So Becky, John, and I have been working with Takashi and Kevin to determine whether or not it makes sense to have Groton become a green community. So we've researched the process. We met with Kelly Brown last week. She came with a wealth of information. I gave you her PowerPoint presentation. It's in the packet starting on page 41. And basically, we would like to talk to you tonight on whether or not we want to move forward with this. And a couple of things that I want to show, if you jump up to page 41. I gotta come up with a better way to advance this.
There is.
I know, but I don't
No,
have
I'll
it.
tell you about it.
If you hold down the Alt and use the arrow, that'll,
That will do it quicker too?
Yeah.
I kinda like
it
doing
does
this
at least
though.
on this.
Does it make people dizzy?
Yeah, but you get to leave as soon as the microphones get shut off.
I'll still be here. So anyway, basically, the green communities deals with efficient, energy efficiency for technical assistance, municipal buildings, and streetlights. The green communities designation and grant program. These are the things that they do. There are a lot of resources there that we can look at. The Green Community Designation and Grant Program provides up to $20 million annually in grants to qualifying communities. Grants will fund significant energy efficient initiatives. The criteria is that you have to adopt as-of-right siting for the generation of power, adopt an expedited permitting process, which we can do. We already have it in place in many places. You have to create an energy reduction plan to reduce energy in municipal buildings by 20% in 5 years. The purchase only fuel-efficient vehicles, we had a long discussion about that. That does not count for police cruisers and fire engines. It would be for cars
And
that you buy
highway
for
trucks.
department heads, which, by the way, you don't.
Right, and it also trucks, DPW, big
Correct.
trucks don't count.
And then, of course, the biggest issue is the stretch code. And we had a lot of conversation on the stretch code. And basically, a lot of the criteria in the stretch code has already been put into the building code now. And the biggest thing that Kelly pointed out to us that makes a lot of sense here is that it does not count towards renovations and additions
Up to existing property.
to existing, which is huge.
Right.
It's new building, but a lot of the houses being built now are being built to the stretch code. A lot of communities in Massachusetts have adopted the stretch code.
It applies to both residential
Well, no,
and
they've
commercial.
adopted the green communities.
No, this is the
This is the stretch
code.
code.
This is the stretch code. Stretch code.
Okay, yep.
This is the stretch code. So a lot of towns, and if you look up here, there are 2 towns, Groton and Dunstable,
Always behind the times, right?
that haven't adopted the stretch code. But you can see a lot of our surrounding communities have adopted the stretch code. This is the green community, John, designation.
Mark,
And
the
you can-
stretch code, sorry to interrupt, it applies to both commercial and residential?
Yes, yes, it does. So then here are the communities that have adopted the green community. There's 210, and again, there's Groton and Dunstable that have not. So one of the things that I thought was, and then there's a bunch of new
Hey, look at that,
designations.
Grafton just got on.
Yes, Grafton got on last year. Grafton got on last year.
So
and
what was your experience at Grafton?
I did not have any part of that whatsoever, but the town is very proud of it. So if you become a green community, you get an initial grant money of about $125,000 to start up. There are competitive grants up to $250,000 annually.
Actually, just to,
Go,
one,
please.
it starts at 125,000, but their estimate of what Groton would get
Oh, you get 135.
by right, basically, this 135,000 for the first grant that we would get.
Yep. And then up to $250,000 for programs. And, you know, Chelmsford, since 2010, has received 1.1 million. Pepperell has received 622. Tingsboro, 768, and Westford, 1.1. Littleton, who got on, was it last year or the year before, they received $500,000 in grant money. I wasn't able to get air, Becky. I know you had asked me to
Okay.
track down there. I wasn't able to get that today. But,
The two that, well, one of them that stood out to me when I saw a detailed list was Acton, was way up there, because they were at the beginning of the alphabet, so they were at the beginning of the list, but they had a huge amount, they've got a huge amount. And Littleton, which is also a town with a municipal light department.
Correct.
And that's one of the hurdles that was in the past, when Groton actually considered this program in the past and decided it was not a good fit for Groton, due to some certain regulations that involve municipal light committees. But those
That has since gone
regulations
away.
got changed, and other towns with municipal light committees, such as Littleton, have applied, and it's been very successful.
so the question to the board tonight is, do you have a problem with us continuing the investigation into this? Because ultimately, what I would like to do is bring Kelly Brown and their expert on the stretch code to come into a meeting and have them walk you through the stretch code to talk about what the impacts are. Go ahead, I'm sorry, John.
I think that you need to, at this point, if we're gonna investigate it, you need to put a committee in place that will not consist of more than one Board of Select person. I don't wanna see another one of these situations where two Board of Select people are on a committee, and the next thing we know, we've got all kinds of screaming people about,
Violating the open meeting law.
violating the open meeting law. It needs to get put in place, and it needs to be put in place for 5 years, because one of the hardest commitments in this that you have to meet, and I guess there's a little wiggle room, but not a lot, is that it's 25, you've got to reduce town consumption
20% over 5 years.
20% over 5 years.
Now, I asked this very specific question, what happens if you don't?
They may
As
give you-
long as you're showing progress, they'll work with you to get it done. And you can pick the time period you want to go back 2 years.
Up to 2 years.
Up to 2 years, you can go back.
start
Sure,
your-
you wanna start at year zero.
Yeah, and we would start last year if we were to do this, because we would get some great credit on the senior center, once that's constructed, and hopefully, the
DPW.
DPW garage, and working with the school department, which has already done a lot of things, the buildings in Groton, we would get credit for as well.
Well, the school,
The regional school
district can either opt in with us
Yep.
Right.
or opt out.
Yep.
That's their call.
But they have already been investigating it, apparently.
Mike Knight has done a lot of work on it.
Allison?
So I mean, to me, clearly, it makes sense to continue to investigate this. I agree that if it's gonna go forward, the sooner kind of a committee is formed, probably the better. I think what I'm seeing here is very in favor of this, and my only concern is that we need to really look at this with our eyes open to understand what the impacts are of cost and otherwise. The things that come into my mind now are, if we were to adopt the stretch code, what is that gonna mean for the DPW, for the library, for a Florence Roach kind of thing? And
That's why I want to bring the expert. Kelly said she'd come out with him, and I can't remember his name, and he would really walk you through the stretch code.
But is that person and I don't know, are they an impartial kind of information source, or are they part of this program that they're coming out to sell it by?
Well,
I don't remember.
I don't think they get anything by selling it to us. She seemed very, very knowledgeable. And one of the key things that she said is that since so many of the surrounding towns have already adopted the stretch code, that the argument that would have been heard 10 years ago before that happened, that this is going to increase the cost of building in this town, and therefore builders aren't going to want to build in this town, or they're not going to make as much money in this town, they're going to resist this. That has gone away because the stretch code has been adopted by all these communities around us. And also, she said, stretch code was created, I think, in 2010, and the building code, you probably know this, the building code has been updated 2 or maybe even 3 times since then, and with each update, the building code has incorporated more of the stretch code. So the stretch code is not all that hugely different from the regular building code at this point.
That's a very good point.
And I don't disagree with any of that. I just think we need to be very cognizant that, she's coming out, she works for the entity that's selling this. And
Yes, that's a good point.
It's very easy to look at things like number 2 and say, oh, adopt an expedited permitting process. Great, we can do that, check. But if the reality is that's gonna cost us 2 additional employees, then we have an issue.
We've actually already done that.
Well, we're a 43D community, but this would be for every single permit that comes in. That's different.
I
Allison's
just
right.
think we need to be really cognizant as we look at this. Adopt the
Obviously, we
stretch
don't
code,
want
well,
to.
what is that gonna?
Yeah, we don't want to find hidden costs.
Right.
Can we try to speak in turn here? John's got his hand politely raised, waiting to speak, so, John, please.
I just want to point out to the people in the audience what stretch code is.
Good point.
There's been an incentive
I touch my toes.
coming down from the federal government through state governments and so forth to make homes and businesses more energy efficient. And so you have the building code, And then they created the stretch code. Well, they didn't create the stretch code. They created an energy reduction code in buildings. And then they decided, okay, maybe that gets us 80% of our objective. But then they added some more and called it the stretch code. So it's a top hat, if you will, on top of the addition of many energy reducing activities into the building code. And back when this first started, the gap between what was in the building code and what the stretch code was enormous. But over the years, more and more of what in the beginning was in the stretch code has been added into the standard building codes. So I hope that helps a little bit for people who may not have heard this term.
I'm going to quiz you on it later, Bud, as the audience.
So I'm hearing that, I've heard a request for a committee to be created. Was that accurate, John?
I think it needs to happen. Whether you do it now or you wait till you're a little bit more determined, decided that you want to proceed.
Yeah, how about I ask this a different way? Does people see enough potential benefit here? And understand we got to do due diligence vetting, that it's worthwhile to get a cross-section of citizens together who would ultimately give us a recommendation whether or not we should do this. I personally see enough potential here that this is worth investigating, and I don't think there's any point in holding on until we get another presentation.
I generally agree with you, but I do want to point out that if we're serious, we need to get going on this because they don't do grants year round. There's only 2 windows, right? When grants are, you get 2 shots over a year to apply for grants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we miss opportunities, we're going to wait longer and longer to get our fingers in the grant sources.
Right, Becky?
So the process, as I understood it from the presentation, was that we have to adopt the stretch code at a town meeting vote before we can apply for the green community. And so, but once we do that, it can happen relatively quickly. And yes, there's some urgency to get on board because we're doing a lot of energy reduction stuff already, witness the senior center planning. We might as well get in on getting credit for it so that we can get faster toward the place where we can get grant money. So I don't feel like we need a committee to tell us what to do at this very point, at this particular point in time. I think we can proceed. I think obviously there has to be a committee at some point that kind of oversees how we go.
I would like to see us get information for this board on the stretch code. I think that's an important first step. Maybe we don't need a committee, but I want us to understand exactly what that impact is. And I would like to invite a consultant out here to explain the stretch code to this board.
So that we are in a position to put that on the warrant for a Springtown meeting.
That's
we have enough time to discuss it.
So with the board's permission, can we make that the first step?
I would agree to that.
To me, it doesn't make sense to do that until we have a committee of some sort formed, in that they're going to need to get educated about the stretch code, and that now we're bringing in the same presentation or presenter twice.
I see what you're saying.
John, go ahead.
Well, I also want to point out that if we wish to pursue it, then we should be prepared for the Springtown meeting to either say, go get it, or no.
Yep.
Right.
And when they say go get it, we need to have everything lined up, everything signed. It's not just the vote. There's a whole lot of homework that's got to be done in preparation for the grant request and the recognition as a green community. We want to have all that homework done so somebody can drive into Boston on the day after the meeting and say, here.
So do you want
John,
me to
I
skip?
thought, my recollection was we could have the stretch code vote in the spring, but we had until sometime in the fall to get the full application in for green community, and they acted pretty fast when they had it so that we actually could conceivably get money like in January after that.
Well,
If there's money available in June, why wait?
I guess it's my old age that makes me realize that, or at least think, that if we push for Springtown meeting, we'll be ready by fall.
Yes, I agree with you there.
I would like to have a committee educate at the same time the board is educated, and I think that
that's
we wouldn't,
worthwhile.
either we make a decision, either we decide to go forward without a committee, which is certainly within the board's purview. We can make these decisions educatedly and say, let's go forward. I don't know that anybody on this board has the appetite to do that all the time, or the expertise, except for, maybe Allison and Becky, who's had a lot of learning. So if we're gonna have a committee, period, let's get it going, let's get it educated simultaneously, and then let's make it prepared to be able to present the stretch code and the plan for the green communities at spring town meeting. And if we start now, they'll definitely be ready in time.
Becky and John, why don't the three of us get together over the next day or so and figure out a makeup of this committee and bring it back to the board Monday night?
Right.
Is that all right with you two?
And I think this is
Maybe
perhaps
Becky can join us
a
Thursday
committee that involves more town employees and not so many citizen volunteers.
Yeah.
Because it's town board,
It's-
town department.
I mean,
that have
there's,
to do this.
implementation,
Yeah.
there's things that come into play. So,
Becky, you free Thursday morning at 8:30?
let me check my low-tech calendar. I think I am.
Because that's when John and I usually get together on our weekly meeting. You can
Yes,
join us?
I could do that.
All right, so Thursday morning at 8:30. Barry, I'll put this on the agenda for
Please.
next week.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. Thank
We'll
you.
have that done. The last thing I have, before we get into other business, is I wanted to call to everyone's attention, I wish Connie was still here, but the Groton School followed through on their commitment that they made to us last year, that they would provide $20,000 towards the school resource officer. They provided us with their in lieu of tax payment check this year, and the check was for $145,000, 20 of which was for the school resource officer. Their FY18 in lieu of tax payment was $113,000. So they increased the payment to $125,000, and then they added another 20 on top of that. So I think that's important, and I wanted the board to be aware of that, and the public to be aware of that, because I think that shows a nice partnership with the Groton School moving forward. So I thought that was important.
And the Groton School even called out in their letter that they were appreciative of the willingness of the town to take on the ownership of putting a resource office together, and that they want to contribute to that because they clearly benefit from it. So I think that's a wonderful partnership that we have with that institution, and I hope it continues to prosper.
I agree 100%. Mr. Chairman, before I turn over to Allison on the community compact, town meeting adopted, authorized the selectmen to lay out and accept the roads for the Groton School sidewalk, the reconfigured intersection. So I have an order of taking. I'd ask the board to vote to accept and issue the order of taking for that, and then sign it, and I will notarize your signatures.
Does anybody need me to read this into the record?
No, I just think vote to issue the order of taking.
The order of taking is a legal technicality that has to be complied with to transfer the Groton School land that was necessary to put the sidewalks in and transfer the ownership to the town.
Correct.
So I'll make a motion that we approve the order of taking for parcels A through H as shown on the plan prepared by Semiotis Consultants, Inc., dated September 5th, 2018.
Thank
I'll
you,
second.
Allison.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Anything further from the public person? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
I heard that unanimous. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
That's Allison's turn.
Allison's turn.
Right, yeah.
So I had a brief conversation with our new town council, who, in that conversation, the community compact was kind of brought to my attention. So I did a very brief amount of reading on their website and cutting and pasting, basically my understanding, and Mark or other more educated folks correct me where and when I'm wrong. This is an agreement that we as a community have signed on to with the state, and they have grant monies available whereby we would apply for specific categories of assistance, and they would potentially appoint kind of a consultant that they pay to come work with us to make sure that we are aware of best practices, to analyze our current practices and help move toward those best practices in a number of different areas. They have a rolling application process, is my understanding, and we can't in any one year partake of more than one kind of opportunity. My understanding is that we have participated a few years ago in one around financial management best practices. Budget, okay. I think having read the document online and on their website, they have these for dozens upon dozens of communities. That potentially there's more work that we could do with a consultant in that area, but there are potentially other areas that we might also identify as a priority. So at this point, my goal was to kind of bring this to everyone's attention, and then see if there is interest in looking into it more so. If there are, if we all read through the list and felt like, oh, these are our 2 priorities, then maybe we can go forward right now. If we read it and we came up with, 8 different priorities among the 4 of us, then that's a different situation. So I don't know what people's thoughts were kind of as they reviewed this.
So thank you, Allison, for putting this together and bringing this back to our attention. I recall, being really invested in this a couple years ago and being excited about all the different ones, and then I think unfortunately last year we kind of decided not to apply for any of these, which was probably a mistake on our parts. But as I read through this, I see that some of these are very, very close to what we already do and maybe only require minor tweaks. The only thing that ever concerns me with something like this is the amount of work required to hand off, the dollar value we get back versus the time we spend, right? So that's the only concern I have. John or Becky, do you have any ideas, comments, considerations? Becky?
I'm not exactly clear. We would vote to do something?
The guidance here is that we could request, and I don't even know if it would require a vote, but we could certainly request the town manager to look into, we can make a priority list. Here's the 3 things we think that we would like to look into. Certainly get his input. Is there one of these he'd like to go forward? And I would ask the cost benefit analysis. Which one of these is going to give us the most benefit for the least amount of, town hall employee?
Okay,
usage?
let me back up. I didn't express myself very well. When I first read this, my understanding was we would vote to enter into the community compact.
We've already done that.
We did that.
The lieutenant governor came out and signed a document. It was a little
I get it.
signing ceremony.
So that means there's grant money available. We just have to apply for it?
If we want to enter into another compact with the state, we've already done 2. We've done the budget and we've done the
IT, right?
cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And they came in and they tested our systems and we passed. We had a really good turnout on that.
As I was reading through this list, I had the same sense, Barry. I was saying, well, I was not understanding exactly what it was for, but I was thinking there were a lot of these things that we have already done or are embarking on, like become a green community, potentially. But so, tell me again what you're asking me at this point. Would I think I should go through and choose my 3 or 4 priorities from this list, or?
Allison, what was your goal moving forward? That you would like us to apply for one or more of these?
Yeah,
every
I mean,
right?
to me, this feels like we're ignoring an opportunity to work with a consultant to make sure we're exercising best practices. I think that there are, some of these areas are more of a priority for our community or for our board, given where we're at right now. And I would love to have us kind of look through them and pick 2 or 3 that we think would be beneficial, and then reach out, to, I think his name is Sean, who kind of coordinates this, and move one of them forward.
So if you're accepting nominations, Allison, I would urge us to consider the housing and economic development best practices, because that seems to be the least mobile system in our whole area. Is we haven't done very much with economic development. We haven't done very much with housing, not through lack of trying, not because we don't have the right committees, but just because we seem to be poorly staffed for that type of situation. In fact, we don't have a staffing for economic development. And our housing is we have a great housing, for affordable housing, but we have a challenging situation regarding where we are and all the other problems that go in. And I know we've got committees working on those, so, I mean, that one stung out at me as
Right.
the one that gives us the most benefit, and we have but it's not necessarily the easiest one to accomplish, right?
Well, I think the question becomes, and Mark, maybe you can see if, my thinking is looking at this, there's housing and economic development best practices. And then underneath there appear to be 4 categories, and my understanding was that we would pick one of those
Within that.
within
Correct.
that. So, I think
Sure.
housing, it makes perfect sense.
I thought we just do all the best practices.
Right. You can mastermind that. To me, there was one under IT that was around transparency and communication. I think that's relevant. I think the financial budget piece, to me, seems potentially relevant, but that may be more evidence of my neophyte status here, rather than, because there's really work to be done there. Mark, do you have a feel or ideas as to which one of these you think would be
I have
most
to go through it
beneficial?
again in more detail. I haven't gone through it in quite some time.
Okay.
So I appreciate being informed about this, that I had no idea about this program. I think I didn't look at it carefully enough to, identify things that I thought might
Right.
be useful.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me this is what I wanted to do tonight, and people can review it, and we can talk about it again in, a week or two. There's no particular urgency to this. There's no particular deadline. It's just an opportunity we're kind of leaving on the table right now.
Yeah.
So everybody's clear that, you don't just choose, and that's right, and I apologize for being broad in my original statement. You don't
Right.
just choose one section, you choose a best practice within that section to go after. Sorry, John, I have my back to you.
No, that's okay. There is in the finance management best practices, a best practice about develop and utilize a long-range planning forecast model that assesses both short-term and long-term financial implications of current and proposed policies, programs, and assumptions over a multi-year period. And then there is this is another opportunity, prepare a capital improvement plan that reflects the community's needs, is reviewed and updated annually, and fits with a financing plan that reflects the community's ability to pay. Now, that one sounds very similar to a discussion earlier.
But we already do that in the 5-year capital plan. That's why we didn't apply for that the
But
first time.
5 years isn't very far out.
But also, I see
So I think there are some other opportunities we might.
the one under asset management about inventory and geocode all of the public works assets. So a database of every public works asset is created, geocoded and condition rated to inform capital planning. That sounds intriguing.
So do we, Mark, within these, some of them, like the financial ones, there's a series of 5 or 6 best practices.
Yep.
In other categories, under, I can't remember what, energy and environment, there's 50 different best practices, and they're grouped in different areas. Do we pick one best practice, or do we pick one
Area.
category when
Category
they
within the
exist?
area, yes.
So if we were to pick financial, we would potentially do all of the ones listed because there's
Yep,
no
we picked one
subcategory?
within there, because the first one we picked was developing a budget document.
I think you got 2 different answers.
Exactly,
Yeah.
I do too.
I see a sort of simple approach. Pardon me, I'm back to an Excel spreadsheet again.
I think there's a big number and a small number.
You list all these practices.
That's what I'm saying, do we pick a
And
big
each
one or a
member
little?
of the board gets a ballot,
Okay.
and you can pick one in each practice, and then we can talk about,
Which one we want to apply for.
Yeah, I don't,
to keep this moving
Mm-hmm.
ahead.
But this reminds me of a related question. We were going to have a presentation from Kevin Lindenberg and Jack Petropoulos on economic development and some limits or something.
Yeah, they asked it to be taken off the agenda before
Right,
town
but-
meeting. I haven't had a chance to reschedule it.
Okay. It would be useful to have that come back.
Mhm.
Would help me.
So why don't I work with Allison to put together a proposal to bring back to the
Mhm.
board for something, and then we'll do it.
I never knew about this, so
In
thank
the
you.
meantime, if members have priorities that they feel after reading this document they'd like to see, throw those into Mark so we can consume them and make recommendations accordingly using our, so we're not second guessing after and coming back with other
Absolutely.
things. Let's make this an efficient process, please.
Right.
And I'm gonna assume if Governor Baker doesn't get reelected, this program's gonna go away? 'Cause it's
I
Governor
read
Baker's
that in
program.
the first sentence, and I started saying, wait a minute, how much time do we have?
We have a month.
What's gonna happen?
By the time we decide what we want to do, we'll know whether or not.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to forego, due to the length of the meeting tonight, a review of the ongoing issues list, since we covered a lot of it on the agenda. And I'd ask the board to consider
Wait,
approving minutes.
I have a question on one of them.
Yep.
On J, the task force to consider adding additional police officers.
Yep.
I had two thoughts about that. Could we ask Chief Luth to come in and just sort of share a sort of initial settling in thoughts before we get into the budget cycling where, you know, he may or may not be asking for stuff? Does that make sense to the rest of the board to ask him to come in sometime like in November?
When did Chief Luce start his contract?
July.
July.
Well, sometime in July.
So it'll
July,
be 4 months,
mid-July.
August, September, October, yeah, like 4 months.
I understand from the town manager that no increase in officers are being sought at this time.
Not in fiscal
From
20.
the Groton Police Department.
Correct.
Um,
I'd like to take that off the list.
yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about that myself.
My general recommendation then, thus would be to, if we want a status update, let's give the full 6 months. That would be normal for a position of this magnitude, to not do the initial assessments and then spend 3 months in the job, you know, working it before we request a status update. Because I think it would be premature from an organizational point of view.
Well, so 6 months would put us into
January,
January.
February timeframe.
And you're saying that what?
He's not gonna be
It's not
asking
gonna
for
affect
any
our
new
budget.
men in this FY '20 budget.
He's not gonna
cycle.
ask for any increase.
Correct.
There's no impetus on budget. Let's do the organizationally appropriate thing and give the proper amount of time before we ask for a status update. State of the
I
department.
was just remembering that the way the contract is written, eventually, I mean, we have to decide before the end of a calendar year to not renew a contract.
No,
anyway.
no, that's after 3 years, in the
After 3
third year.
Right.
Right.
We have him,
Okay.
unless you wanna.
Okay, well, I guess
You
I
don't
would,
want to?
I would leave it up to him as to whether he would like to come in now or later.
I'll talk to
That
him.
way. And, but I would also support you removing this from this list.
I will remove it.
Well,
John.
thus I
John.
make a motion that we remove it.
Yeah, thank you. Motion's been made.
I'll second it, and can I explain my thought was we should change the wording, because reading this every month, every week implies that there's going to be an addition of police officers,
Not
and
contemplation.
rather than setting that expectation.
So did you second my motion?
I did second it, and I'm sort of explaining why I would like to remove it, or at least change it.
Allison?
So for me, I'm perfectly comfortable changing it to a task force to review police staffing or something a little bit more neutral. You know, my real concern with this is that because we didn't have this work done in advance of the real intense need at the fire department, we now find ourselves in a bit of a bind. So I'm hesitant to take this off or potentially eliminate the task force, because we'll find ourselves in the same position with police in a year, 2 years, 3 years. So to me, there's a lot of benefit once the fire department task force perhaps is done to seeing if those same folks have capacity and interest in, which I think was our intent recently, to look at the police department and see whether there are concerns that we should be aware of for the next few years.
And I concur with you. It's my hope that at 6 months, the Chief Luth will have an understanding of how things are going today and be able to give us some type of prognostication of what the future might hold a year out. At that point, I think that it would be appropriate for us to bring this item back to decide, what we want to do. So technically it's not an ongoing issue, so it shouldn't be on this list. It was a holdover from a previous thing. I think it will become an issue again. It will become a top line issue, at which point it would then become an ongoing issue again. So it doesn't really matter one way or the other. I have always expected as part of the process and part of the conversations we've had with the chief that he would come back with, and I know the town managers tasked him with getting settled, doing an evaluation, and coming back with, you know, his estimation of the department and its needs moving forward. In fact, no new chief would do that without being strategically oriented, of course.
I'm in the process right now of establishing goals with the department heads and doing their annual reviews. And I gotta tell you, Chief Luth has put together a very good plan for next year in terms of his goals. I'll share it with the board, but I think, Allison, that will address your issues because that's part of his overall review process. He really put a lot of thought into his goals for next year. He really did.
Great.
I was impressed.
Can they be publicized, or?
I'll share them with the board. I intend to, once I'm
Okay.
done with all the reviews, to provide a document to the board with all the department heads' goals for next year,
Okay,
so that you can see what the goals are.
great.
Some have a lot of goals, some have not that many goals, depending on the department.
So, are we gonna vote on removing this list?
That would be my next order of business, is
Sorry.
to call for any further discussion, anything from the public.
But
Hearing none, I'll call for vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition?
Yay.
So I heard that 3-1 for,
As we go through, Mark, unrelated to this, but you were talking about department goals, what is the best way? One of our goals for this year, obviously, was to kind of coordinate department goals, department head goals, select board goals.
yeah, you guys took that off your list. You guys removed that.
We took it off our list for this year with the existing goals that were already kind of in process. How do we want to review that, or do we want to review that moving forward? I mean, do we want to kind of put?
I got the impression you didn't. That's what I
I
heard.
can understand how that impression got me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that what we, if I can sum our discussion, the way I recall it was that we were doing this backwards. We were going from a disjointed top-down approach, which really doesn't make sense, instead of how can we support the goals of the town and the town departments to achieve their maximum, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that it's worth revisiting that goal, which is I hope what you're trying to say,
Right, that's
from
Oh, I
the other,
misunderstood.
from the other perspective of not us pushing stuff down,
Right.
but what is within each of these policies that we would require and benefit, if you will, from some type of support from the select board, and therefore from the town manager, theoretically, right? That way we don't end up with these disconnected, disjointed ideas that can't go anywhere because they don't exist in the employee world, in the town employee world. Is that recapturing that discussion better?
So maybe Mark, you and I should talk about it a little bit when we talk about the community compact and
Sure.
see whether there are
Yeah,
buckets
let me
or something.
put together the list, I definitely want to do that, but let me put together the list of department head goals once I'm done with all of my reviews. I'm seeking input right now. The charter requires me to seek input from the various boards and committees that oversee those particular boards, so I've reached out to committee chair for some of the department heads. So it's a pretty involved process. There's a lot going on in my office right now. And we're about to embark on a budget process, so I'm so glad we're gonna be doing community compact as well. I look
Just-
forward to all of this.
But just think, we were 3 weeks ahead on town meetings.
Yes,
so
I know, and all of a sudden that 3 weeks just got wiped out.
And I think, Mark, to your point, that employee bandwidth is a very legitimate concern that we should be aware of and cognizant as we discuss the community compact or any other new project. I mean, I think
And this
that's-
employee bandwidth. Next week, Barry, you and I can talk about this Wednesday morning or tomorrow morning when we talk about the agenda for next week, but I don't have any specific items for the 22nd other than getting together with the finance committee to set goals. Do you guys want to start board at 6:30? I'm sorry.
Don't we have to approve the ballot question thing?
That's one of the things. Yeah, there isn't a lot for you to do other than there are a couple of minor things. But do you want to meet at 6:30 to get your business done and then just spend the time at the FinCom at 7? Or do you want to do the FinCom at 7 and then your business afterwards?
I would
You know,
prefer
I'm
7.
happy at nighttime hours, but that may not be the will of the rest of the board, so, and I know Bud gets tired, gets walked past
You-
10
what?
PM here.
I'm sorry, I talked over you, Barry. What did you say? I apologize.
I said, it doesn't, I'm fine with either way. I'm okay with after or before. I get a little concerned when you say 30 minutes because I know this board. Unless we constrict the agenda, and maybe you and I can work to constrict the agenda to uncontroversial items without objection from any member of the board, to make sure.
There's no
that
way
we're
you
just
can
doing-
know that.
We're just making pretty good adjustments based on what's on there and what's not on there.
There might be a
Just
couple
be
of minor
tactical.
appointments, there might be a
Yeah.
couple of minor appointments, and then the one major issue is to approve what I gave you tonight. Barry, you weren't here at the beginning of the meeting, but I handed out it's in your packet.
Yeah,
I think, you know, by the way, Allison wrote the pro, the anti, Becky wrote the pro, I thought they both did a great job. This is before town council for review, and I think it's gonna be ready to go next week.
I think if
So
we
we'll go to the
limit it
board.
to a couple of tactical
Okay.
approval items
Yep.
as well, and victual, you know, whether we have to do some license approval or something like that, and this, because I see this could take 20 minutes of our time.
Really? Okay.
So Barry, are you advocating for 6:30 or 7?
I'm happy to join us at 6:30. I would be okay to do that on Monday, and it won't cause me any grief, rather than make everybody stay late afterwards.
What I'm gonna do is start this,
I would prefer 7, but I'll do 6:30 if it's the will
Well,
of the board.
we don't want to, we can't do 7 because we can't hold up the
well,
fifth.
what I was gonna say is, why don't we start the board meeting at 6:30, and then the FinCom at 7:15, give you 45 minutes to go over. And Barry, you and I can figure out the agenda tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Is that all right with the board? Allison,
Well,
John?
so you have a channel starting at 6:30 is what I heard.
I do.
No, I heard I'm sorry, I heard Becky
The
say
other
that.
No, I
Allison.
just said I
Yeah.
prefer 7.
Granted, I prefer 7 also.
Well, no, 6, I'll do 6:30
Is
if that's the
6:30
will of the
acceptable in
board.
this so that we can get done? Because otherwise, I mean, we can be involved in budget discussions
For a long time.
time.
Yeah. Noah, does 6:30 work for you next week?
Me?
Okay. Noah, I was asking Noah.
John?
You're Allison.
Allison.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so we'll do a 6:30 to 7:15. We'll be in session, so theoretically, we could start in joint session with the FinCom, or we could start our part and they could join us at 7:15 if we decide to go forward in the audience.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put tables across the front, the whole front for the FinCom to sit, so it's a joint meeting, not them coming to you. We'll have microphones and
yeah.
everything set up.
Might even want Gary Green to be the official chair of the meeting, since it's a budget meeting.
Yep.
And I'll play second fiddle, which is normal.
So,
No, we can sit out there and have the FinCom set up
We
here.
can do
Yep.
that. Yes, Becky?
just while we're talking schedule, can I confirm that Monday, November 12th is a holiday and we will not be meeting?
You can confirm that, and yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll need that off because I'm gonna be, that's after some of the surgeries I'm having coming up. I should let the board know my schedule. I will let you know. It's pretty
You
involved.
don't need to let the public
Yeah, I
know
don't, you're
all
right.
your private medical details, that's fine.
You're right.
Bud, are you raising your hand?
No,
Okay, all right.
I have one last announcement.
give me the score.
Red Sox 8, Houston 2.
Yay!
Game over.
Game over.
Jackie Bradley Jr., grand slam.
All right, finally.
Yep.
I have a liaison report.
Yes, Becky, please, liaison reports.
So it's not an official liaison, but I met with the newly energized nonprofit council on Friday morning last week. We had a group of 25 people representing quite a breadth of nonprofit organizations in town, both size, scope, vision, really representing the richness that nonprofit organizations add to our community. We had a good discussion, some ideas, how to publicize their presence more. Talked about some ways that the town can support them, but really for this
Night,
group
bud.
to become a group on their own is kind of the long-term goal. And we set another date to meet, so. And I want to thank the fire department for allowing us to use their lovely training room.
And that was the best turnout of that nonprofit council in 2 years. Nice job, Becky.
Thank you.
Was there any outcomes or any
Yeah,
ideas? Is there anything you want to make us aware of? Any discussions?
No, there were some good ideas and some things that are going to be worked on for publicizing and pulling the group together a little bit.
Okay. Mark, I wasn't here. May I ask who wrote the yeses and nos in favor?
Yeah.
Just said it.
Becky wrote the yes, Allison wrote the no.
Okay.
Those are the, I flipped through this, Barry, there's a lot of text in here, not the first thing, not the explanation that you see, not the summary. I don't know who wrote those.
Town
No,
clerk.
I meant the yeses and nos.
The arguments in favor and
for it, I
against.
guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were recruited by the
Town clerk.
I think we did it in isolation, so.
Yeah,
It may be
yeah.
that they.
Yeah, tonight we haven't read each other's.
Exactly, I don't know.
Okay.
You're gonna wait on the minutes till later, or?
No, let's,
I'll make a motion that
has
we
anybody-
approve both sets of minutes as before us.
Okay, the motion's been made.
I'll second.
The motion's been made and seconded.
And the dates are September 17th and
24th.
24th, 2018. Are there any concerns, questions, objections, reactions? Hearing none and having no public to consult, I'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those 2 minutes are now approved. Thank you very much. Approved and released, correct?
Yep.
Automatically.
I'm sorry, I had one question, I was reminded of in those minutes. Mark, you had said you would give us, you would memorialize the conversation with Indian Hill and give us that.
Oh, I could give you an update. I approved the draft of our position today. Town council needs to send that off to Indian Hill for their approval, and then once they sign off on it, I will bring it back to the select board for your
Thank you.
approval. But I approved the draft today, so I'm sorry. I'm glad you asked that question. I should have updated you earlier. So that's still in process.
All right, hearing no further items and, oh wait, we'll call us an adjournment, please.
Since I have to lock up the building, everybody else.